Chapter 191. A small goal 6. The bishop remained silent. All he did was look at Cal up and down repeatedly. They could hear the auctioneer's voice from beyond the curtain. The first item is a fountain pen with a beautiful feather. The feather is, as expected, the remains of a beautiful beast person. The voice was loud enough to break the silence in Terrace 1. "How much do you want?" A dry voice echoed inside the terrace. The servant almost arrogantly started to discuss the deal. It basically revealed that he was actually the bishop. He asked his question and did not say anything else. "Who are you, or do you really have the item?" Those kinds of questions were not important at all. For the bishop, who had experienced all sorts of things throughout his life, the only thing that mattered was the single line in Cal's invitation, the sentence written underneath that gave credibility to the reason for the invitation. The bishop knew that the dead pope was a greedy man. That was the reason he had given the knight's exaltation as an offering. He also knew that the pope had a secret area where he kept all of these treasures. Wasn't it possible that a divine item would be in such a location? The bishop wanted to become the pope. He was just waiting for the right opportunity to seize the position. He continued to observe the man in the white mask in front of him. The masked man had yet to answer his question about how much he wanted for the item. The masked man's uncovered mouth slowly started to open. They say that the knight's exaltation shines even brighter when it comes into contact with dead mana. This is different than how normal items react when they come into contact with dead mana. The bishop sighed and responded back to the masked man who was spewing nonsense. "What is it?" "You want to take your knight's exaltation and experiment with the fake one in the temple?" The bishop could hear the masked man scoff at him. Cal shook his head while looking at the bishop. "Old man, what a terrible personality you have. This is normal as you get older." The priest in front of them flinched, however. He did not turn to look behind him. The priest quietly stood there and pretended to not be aware of the bishop in servant's clothes and the intruder. "How much do you want?" The bishop asked for the price once again. The knight's exaltation appeared in front of his eyes at that moment. "I guess you don't suspect that I'm a spy from the Empire," the bishop bluntly responded back to the masked man's question. "Spy or not, the fact that you are a merchant trying to sell me an item does not change." This dude is quite smart. This was indeed the case. Whether he was a spy from the Empire or not, the bishop cared more about the chance to recover the knight's exaltation and purchase a divine item. Cal liked this bishop quite a bit. However, he did not fix the error in the bishop's statement. Merchant? Cal was not a merchant. In fact, he was a hunter. He was planning on throwing out the baits one by one in order to draw in the prey in front of him into a trap. The first bait was the divine item. The bishop would definitely purchase the knight's exaltation in order to get his hands on a divine item. He needed a way to remain connected to Cal. Cal opened his mouth to speak. "How much?" "What? Ho!" The bishop laughed in disbelief. The punk in front of him was telling him to initiate a starting price. However, the bishop actually liked this. Why? It was because this merchant knew who held the upper hand. The masked man knew he was in control of this discussion. That was why he was trying to pressure the bishop. The bishop liked intelligent people like this. It made it easier to handle them. The rational people were the ones who understood their gains the best. 5. The bishop called out 5 billion to start. It was a reasonable price for the knight's exaltation. This had been the cost when it was originally found. If you consider how long ago it was discovered, it was an astronomical price. However, Cal was stern. "How much?" The bishop immediately shot back. 6. The two of them were in a race in this negotiation. The auction started behind them as well. The negotiation remained calm. "How much?" 7. They could hear the auctioneer's voice coming from beyond the terrace. "All right, we have 300 million pounds. Any other bids?" "Ah, an extra 1,000 pounds. Cal asked again at the same time. "How much?" The priest seemed to be getting anxious because of the two words Cal were repeating over and over. He seemed to be flinching every time it was asked. 8. The priest gasped at the bishop's response. Both the bishop and the intruder were making it hard for him to breathe. "How much?" The bishop could tell that the man in front of him was getting bored. 10 billion pounds. The price had reached the 10 billion level. Although the price was double the original selling price, the bishop could tell something after looking into the masked man's eyes. This still is not enough. The bishop started to speak before Cal could open his mouth once again. 15. He was now putting the value of the knight's exaltation as the price for the divine item and the pope position. He then added on. However, it is impossible to give you anything more than 10 billion today. How much? Ho, the bishop could not help but gasp. He started to glare at the masked man. Is that the only thing you know how to say? You're supposed to respect your elders, you little punk. Although the words sounded as if the bishop was scolding him, the tone was gentle. In fact, it even sounded a bit affectionate, but Cal was not one to be tricked by such an act. Cal was tired of speaking and just asked with his gaze, "How much?" The bishop lifted his hands up as if he admitted defeat and responded back. 20. Gasp. They could hear the priest gasping in front of them. He seemed to be shocked at the price. That's the max. The bishop shook his head with a tired expression. He was trying to tell Cal that he was telling the truth. However, there was something Cal had learned during his time as Kim Rock-Soo. Hit the corrupted people one extra time. His team leader that had taught him everything about working had given him that advice right before he passed on the team leader position to him. That was very sound advice. How much? You son of a bitch. The bishop now started to swear. Cal did not care as he had heard all sorts of swearing directed at him when he was Kim Rock-Soo. The corrupt ones always resorted to swearing when they were in a pinch. The bishop closed his eyes and started to speak. 22. 23. You bastard. The knight's exaltation was settled for 23 billion pounds. The bishop rubbed his tired face. However, Cal recalled something else his team leader had said during Cal's time as Kim Rock-Soo. If they are corrupt and they have a lot of money, try hitting them once more to see what happens. However, Cal did not plan to do so with the bishop. But if you can use them later, make sure to give them some room to breathe. Since he was planning on using the bishop, there was no reason to rip him off completely and destroy this relationship. Cal was thinking about the future as he observed the bishop calling the priest over. The priest finally turned around and handed over a small money pouch. Here, 10 billion pounds. The bishop then threw the pouch to Cal. You are prepared as I expected, Bishop Nim. Cal respectfully responded as if he had not been talking casually this whole time while the bishop clicked his tongue. Cal then added one more comment. I will see you once more in the future. That made the bishop start to smile. He heard it as Cal saying that he would come to see him again with the divine item. Cal took a piece of paper out of his pocket and put it on top of the table. The location to send the remaining 13 billion pounds was written on it. Screech. The curtain opened once again. Cal disappeared out of the terrace with the money pouch in his hand. The priest, who had been pretending to be anxious this whole time, calmly stood up. The calm expression looked as cold as the bishop's face. Actually, it was even colder than the bishop's face. Go investigate that white-haired man. Yes, Bishop Nim. The bishop, who had been pretending to be a servant, bowed his head toward the priest. Click, click. A magic device in the servant's chest pocket was activated, and the servant's face changed to that of a 40-year-old man. This scarred face looked as if it belonged to an assassin. The bishop sat back down on the chair and leaned back. He then received the magic device from the servant. Click. His face instantly changed to that of the bishop. He brushed his face and started to speak. It is annoying to touch this old face. The bishop's voice had turned into that of an old man as well. It's also hard to pretend to be old, but it seems like he doesn't know that I killed the former bishop, right? Yes, sir, he does not seem to know. Start the investigation in the Perun Kingdom since he has white hair. Yes, sir. The bishop touched the magic device once again. Cal had to deal with Rayon's questions as he flew back into Terrace 4. Human, why did you pretend not to know that he used a magic device to disguise himself? That kind of magic device is hard to acquire. It is precious. Cal started to smile. Young Master Nim, welcome back. Billows smiled and quickly closed the curtains after Cal took off his mask. Did it get resolved properly? Yes. Cal nodded his head. Human, why did you pretend not to know? I am curious. and the bishop pretended to be scared, but his pupils did not shake at all, just like you said. Cal ignored Rayon's comments as he recalled what St. Jack had told him. He had explained the bishop's appearance, the bishop's true appearance. The Caro Kingdom's bishop is a skinny woman in her 30s with a sharp gaze. That is her true appearance. Cal started to chuckle. It really is scary. A fantasy world really was scary, it was at that moment. Cal suddenly felt chills going down his back. Young Master Nim. It was Ron, who was handing him some lemonade. Cal felt the chills on his back as he looked into Ron's eyes. He heard Rayon's voice at that moment. By the way, human, are you done with the busy errands? Basically. Rayon continued to speak once Cal nodded his head. Human, I've been ignoring the Crown Prince's calls since you told me to do so. Cal felt that something was off. He really did ignore it. Cal didn't expect Rayon to really ignore the calls. He had no idea about how seriously Rayon remembered everything he said. That was the reason for it. Cal felt as if the room was still getting colder. However, Rayon seemed oblivious to it as he happily continued to speak. He's been calling you ever since you started chatting with the bishop. This is the 10th call. What, that Crown Prince, Alberu, called 10 times? He left you a voicemail. I'll let you hear it. Cal tightly clenched on the cup of lemonade. The Crown Prince's voice echoed in his mind. The Northern Alliance is starting to move. What? Cal thought that he might not have heard correctly. The Perun Kingdom is making their move. It is only February. The ocean hasn't even melted yet. Why, son of a bitch. Cal chugged the lemonade in one gulp. The sour taste made him start to frown. Young Master Nim, Billows looked toward him in shock. Cal chucked the money pouch he received from the bishop toward Billows. The confused Billows caught the money pouch. Cal then gave him an order. Make sure to buy the Wolf King's remains. Excuse me. There's 10 billion in there, so make it happen. Excuse me? 10 billion? Cal, who put Billows in this state of shock, continued to speak. I am leaving first with Ron. Ron, lead the way. Cal made Ron, who came as Billows' servant, take the lead before turning invisible in order to leave the terrace and head for the inn. Human, there is another voicemail. Rayon spoke to Cal, who was quickly walking. Why don't you pick up? He seems to have something to discuss with you. Cal started to frown again. Why does the Crown Prince need to talk to a trash like me? His back was cold, his mouth had a sour taste, and unexpected things were happening. This is driving me nuts. He couldn't help but be annoyed. Chapter 192. Destroying it. 1. Alberu Crossman, the man on the other side of the call, did not look to be doing well. The man who used to look majestic and spotless was currently leaning back on his chair with his hair in a mess. My heart is hurting seeing you like this, Your Highness. Bullshit. The Crown Prince was about to say something else before he saw that Cal didn't look too good either and chose not to say it. Instead, Alberu got down to business. We saw the Perun Kingdom's knights going into Norland. Perun, Norland, and Askasen. These were the names of the 3 kingdoms in the Northern Alliance. Of the 3, Norland was the kingdom to the north of the Forest of Darkness. They would be bordering the Roan Kingdom if the Forest of Darkness did not exist. The informant destroyed the video communication device after delivering that information. The informant sent to Norland was one of the Crown Prince's dark elves. The fact that his elemental has not returned seems to mean he is still alive. He will return alive. Alberu smiled at Cal's response before returning to the topic at hand. I am currently working with the Breck Kingdom in order to see if some of the Perun Knights went over to Askasen as well. Askasen was the closest kingdom to the Breck Kingdom, with the Gorge of Death between them. It seems likely that the Perun Knights went to Askasen as well. Indeed. The informant's message indicated that there were tens of knights. The Perun Kingdom was the northern kingdom of knights. However, even a kingdom with a lot of knights would not normally send tens of knights to another kingdom. Something is weird. That was why Alberu found it to be odd. It is still too early to cross through the ocean. What could they be thinking? There was a reason that the Roan Kingdom and the Breck Kingdom had prepared for the attack in spring. Although Askasen and Norland were at the bottom tip of the north, they were still further north than the Roan Kingdom in the northeast. Their shores were still likely to be frozen. This was especially the case because it was currently early February, one of the coldest times of the year. If the knights are moving, the soldiers will soon move as well. The Roan kingdom might have thought that they were just doing some training drills if they did not know about the Northern Alliance's goal. It is too early to cross across the ocean. The ice in a portion of the water will melt by mid-February, but that is a waste. They'll need to use a lot of manual labor in order to clear it. So why move now? Does the Northern Alliance want to start that war that quickly? Alberu bit down on his lips. The Northern Alliance's decision was surprising. Sending tens of knights to both kingdoms was easy for the other kingdoms to notice. The fact that they still chose to do it so openly meant that there was something they were confident about. He then thought about the Roan kingdom's northeast shores, the construction of the naval base. This information had already spread throughout the continent. They kept it under wraps for as long as possible, however. Something like that was difficult to contain indefinitely. However, the majority of the people believed that the naval base was in its initial stages. They would be wrong. They had completed tens of ships and had been preparing for war by having mages keeping them hidden with magic. All of that is thanks to this punk too. Alberu looked toward Cal's subordinate, the mixed-blooded dwarf rat. Although he had returned to the Hennetus territory now, he had stayed at the Ubar shores for a while in order to look over their blueprints. Thanks to that, they were able to start building the ships earlier than expected. But their plans that were aiming for springtime had to change. Their informant was discovered as well. What did I miss? One thing. He realized that there was an unknown factor that he had missed. He couldn't resolve the thoughts in his head without knowing this crucial factor. Alberu loosened the tightly tied tie on his neck. Can you figure it out? Alberu asked in a frustrated voice. Was the only one he could show this frustration to, and he had called while thinking that Cal's usually calm demeanor would help calm him down. However, he let out a laugh of pity. No, how could you know? Wyvern. Alberu stopped laughing. Could see Alberu almost staring at him with a piercing gaze through the screen. The Wyvern Knights Brigade has been revived. Alberu's eyes opened wide. The guardian knight of the Perun Kingdom's legend and the Wyvern Knights Brigade that he led. Alberu felt his mind clearing up. It's the sky. They were not using ships. No, there would be ships. However, they would come via the sky first and then via ships later. But what can we do about the sky? Alberu's concerned gaze headed toward Cal. When did you find out? Do you know about the fire in the Perun Kingdom's lake? Was it you? Yes, sir. That was when I found out. I forgot to report it. You son of a Can casually shrugged his shoulders. That action made Alberu, who had been sighing, realize something. Cal seemed too calm. Our intelligent young Master Cal. They will be flying over the forest of darkness if they come through the sky. Will the Hennetus territory be okay? Alberu could see the corners of Cal's lips twitching. Cal had waited a long time for this. He had been flustered at first because it was different than what he had read in the novel. However, this was a completely different world compared to the novel already. That was why he had prepared and prepared again for the upcoming days. There was no reason to wait any longer. Your Highness. Yes, please prepare an order to give me command of the Northeast Region's military. Ha! Alberu let out a laugh. Cal was asking for such a big thing in such a casual way. Yes, it should be like this. This is the Cal Hennetus I know. Cal continued to share his requests with Alberu. Please also prepare a Knights Brigade and one of your Mage Brigades as well. Cal started to smile, and then just wait. Alberu brushed his hand across his eyes. This crazy bastard. Just wait. So he's going to defend it on his own. He smiled as he asked Cal a question. Just what the hell have you been up to? Cal just shrugged his shoulders. You cheeky bastard. Contrary to his choice of words, Crown Prince Alberu was smiling brightly. He brushed his messy hair as if he was combing it. At the same time, he also realized what he needed to do. So there was a reason you called the necromancer back to you. Do whatever you need to do. I'll take care of the rest. Just gain power, Your Highness. Don't worry, it is all in my hands once the war begins. Alberu, who seemed to finally be back to his usual self, started planning on a way to push forward the plan he had with a clear mind. Alberu was deep in thought and missed Cal suddenly flinching. Rayon's voice echoed in his head. They want to destroy our house while riding on some stupid wyverns. Really? Cal got the chills after listening to this extremely serious voice. He did his best to ignore the ramblings of this 6-year-old dragon. Anyway, I will do what I have to do, so you take care of your side. Click. He hung up without any notification. Cal leaned back on the couch and looked toward the video communication device. He had a lot of things to do again. Cal immediately headed back home the next day with the Wolf King's remains. Father. Yes. The father-son duo who had not seen each other in a while did not seem to be happy. Count Daruth drank some warm tea in order to calm himself. He had already heard the information from Cal through a call. The Perun Knights went to Norland. Yes, sir. And you think they are going to invade on wyverns? Yes, sir. They'll also enter the Breck Kingdom and our northwest side via Askasen? Correct. Tap. He placed the teacup on the table. Count Daruth then looked toward the territory's flag in the office. He could see the golden turtle, the Hennetus family crest. He then said one word to his son. All right. That was enough. The Hennetus family was originally a martial arts family, and the Rhone Kingdom's northeast region's wall anyway. Daruth was not a warrior, but he knew how to handle a sword and had not forgotten the way of martial arts. Why else would he work so hard to create a knight's brigade in a remote territory like this one? The Golden Turtle. You needed to be thoroughly prepared in order to live a long and peaceful life. He looked toward his son, who had his mother's red hair, the only one with red hair in the household. The affairs of the territory are my business, and helping my son is my business as well. He recalled the things Cal asked for in their call. Daruth reached his hand out to his son. Let's give it a try. His son had said this to him sometime in the past. Father, let's give it a try. His father had not forgotten about it. He had focused on building up the number of the territory's soldiers ever since late last fall, and he had filled up the warehouses with food as well. He also made sure that the castle walls, as well as all of the territory's lands, were well equipped and ready to defend. Cal grabbed Count Daruth's hand. Stealthily, please. Father. Cal could hear Daruth's response through that firm squeeze his father gave his hand. That was enough. There was nothing else he needed to tell Count Daruth right now. That was why Cal immediately headed out of the castle and toward the forest of darkness. He stood where the black swamp used to be and looked down at the dry ground. It has been a while since I've been here. This is great. I missed it so much. The black robe wearing necromancer Mary started to speak while standing next to Cal. The mechanical voice had the slightest bit of joy in it. Is that so, Mary? I like seeing this place with you and the weak human as well. Our front yard truly is the best. The black dragon next to Mary responded back to her. Both the black dragon and the black robe continued to peek toward Cal. Won the movement of the Perun Kingdom's knights. Cal had not said much since he had heard that information. Rayon thought about that as he started to scrunch his nose. Rayon started to speak. Human, do not worry. Nobody will get her, Cal Nim. However, someone cut Rayon off. Choi Han, the tiger shaman Gashin, and the wolf boy Locke were all heading toward the black swamp. Cal had called them over. They all had grim expressions on their faces after hearing what was about to happen. Of course, Gashin had a bit of anticipation as well. The three of them headed toward Cal, who did not even turn around as he continued to look down at the black swamp. Cal seemed to have no intention in turning around. Young Master Nim Gashin called out to Cal. Cal finally turned around, the confident Choi Han, the belligerent Tiger Gashin, and the hesitant Wolf Locke. Choi Han Gashin. Yes, Cal Nim. Please speak, young Master Nim. Cal's gaze headed toward the west. We are going to the Gorge of Death. Get ready. Cal then turned toward Locke. Locke flinched the moment their eyes met, however. He had a more confident gaze than before. He looked nervous to move with Cal for the first time in a while. Cal could see that Locke had gotten stronger after training with Choi Han. However, it was still not enough. The wolf tribe considered the pack and their family as important. However, wolves only grew when they were alone. Loss and loneliness. They needed these emotions they could only feel when they were alone. They needed these emotions in order to realize one other emotion. This other emotion was essential for the wolves. Cal recalled the item in his pocket. The Wolf King's remains. It was a diary, but this diary was written in blood. Cal started to speak to Locke, who was nervously waiting for his orders. "Locke, you are going as well. Get ready." "Yes, yes, sir." The Wolf King needed to spread his name around the world once again. "Mary?" "Yes, sir." The black robe fluttered and headed toward Cal. However, her gaze headed toward the black swamp after hearing a noise. Boom, something appeared from the spatial pocket bag in Cal's hand. Rayon had customized this spatial pocket bag for Cal. Locke flinched and took a step back. His eyes were focused on the center of the black swamp. The shaman Gashan let out a gasp and started to mutter in disbelief. "It's a dragon." A dragon corpse, a set of white bones, appeared in the center of the dry swamp. The large, ancient dragon was giving off a lot of pressure even though it was just a set of bones. This was the dragon corpse that Cal had seen when he found the dominating aura 2 years ago. "Ah," Mary let out a gasp. Her gaze turned back toward Cal. Cal was looking at her as well. He started to speak. "Control it." He gave the necromancer Mary an order. The black robe answered with confidence after a few seconds of silence. "I can do it. No, I will do it." "Good." Mary clenched her fists after seeing Cal responding as if her response was expected. Cal looked up at the sky. The dragon would eat up the wyverns and dominate the eastern sky. Translator's note: 1. I think the author likes using black robe and black dragon together because he likes the repeating black. We already know both of their names, chapter 193. Destroying it. 2. Cal opened his eyes. He could see the teleportation magic circle under his feet. Swoosh, he could also hear the sound of the cold wind. The gorge of death was extremely windy. However, Cal ignored the noise of the wind and looked toward the person who was here to greet him. "It has been a long time, Your Highness." Rosalind's youngest sibling and the Breck Kingdom's 4th Prince, Pen, awkwardly started to speak after seeing Cal's respectful greeting. "Ahem, yes, long time no see." His gaze headed toward Cal's chest. It was a cookie. Cal was holding a cookie. That made Pen recall the drenching he received when he went to the Hennetus territory to see his sister Rosalind in the past. During that incident, he had heard the crunching sound of Cal eating a cookie as if it was background music. "Youngest brother, do it properly. Otherwise, you will lose your life on the battlefield." Pen recalled Rosalind's advice and started to shiver. It made him feel very cold. He awkwardly smiled back at Cal, who was gently smiling at him. Rayon started to speak in Cal's mind at that moment. "It's a fiery thunderbolt instead of water for that crybaby if he whines again. I am practicing the fiery thunderbolt right now." Cal naturally ignored Rayon as he looked around Prince Pen. There were 5 or 6 tents behind 4th Prince Pen. Swoosh, the sound of the wind could be heard again. It was blowing toward them from the gorge of death. This gorge was known to have never-ending wind. The strong winds made by nature made the sides of the deep and tall valley into a resting place of death. February. The winter winds were strong and even carried over the snow tonight, making it hard to see. Cal heard another voice as he looked around at the white snow fluttering through the darkness. "Are you Cal Hennetus from the Hennetus territory?" Cal's gaze headed to the person next to Prince Pen. This was the Breck Kingdom's royal mage's #1 disciple. The name of this person whom people considered to be the future royal mage was Count Ekros. "Human, why is that stupid-looking guy checking you out?" "Right." Cal gently responded in a noble-like manner to Count Ekros, who was looking at him. "That is correct. I am Cal Hennetus, Count Ekros Nim." You know of me, but you did not greet me first." "I apologize. I was amazed as this is my first time visiting the Gorge of Death." Prince Pen felt odd. Why is that person acting like this? Cal Hennetus was acting respectfully for some reason. Pen looked toward Count Ekros and gave him a signal with his eyes. "Count, stop it." Unfortunately, Ekros could not read Pen's signal. He looked toward Cal judgmentally. A 20-year-old. He did not like that the Roan Kingdom sent a 20-year-old punk as their representative. He also did not like how he was pretending to be a hero with ancient powers that only required luck to acquire instead of something like magic, which required effort in order to develop. a typical punk who relies on his connections to make himself look good. The thing the Count did not like the most was that this talentless son of a noble had such a strong personal network. Although he didn't know the details, he had heard that this punk was close to former Princess Rosalind, Crown Prince Alberu Crossman, and even Commander Tunka. He clicked his tongue at Cal, who remained respectful to him even though he was making it obvious that he was looking down at him. He totally saw Cal as the type that was fluent in sucking up. He introduced the people around him on purpose. "Young master, these are the mages from our side. Over there is a Baron Nim, and there is a Viscount Nim." He made sure to emphasize the word, mages, on purpose. The Rhone Kingdom was known to be terrible at magic. However, they suddenly brought the Whipper Kingdom's mages and former Princess Rosalind to the Breck Kingdom and started to teach the Breck Kingdom's mages, although my teacher was happy about it. His teacher, the royal mage, was happy about it, saying that it was a great opportunity. Count Ekros did not deny that it was an opportunity. However, we cannot let go of this power. They had to take the initiative. He took a look around Cal. He didn't bring that many people with him. There was just a man who seemed to be a knight and a feeble boy next to Cal. Things within the Breck Kingdom should be done by us. Former Princess Rosalind had told Prince Pen and him to take good care of Cal. However, he was different than Prince Pen. He had no reason to listen to Rosalind, who was no longer a princess and lived in the Rhone Kingdom. Prince Pen becomes weird whenever former Princess Rosalind is involved, so I need to step up. Otherwise, there was no reason for him to come to the Gorge of Death in order to clean up after this punk who did not even have his own title. Count Ekros looked toward Cal and started to speak. I heard from the Rhone Kingdom about your plan. You're thinking about installing magic bombs in the Gorge of Death. The Baron and Viscount that were introduced earlier stood behind Ekros and observed Cal. It seemed as if they were trying to pressure Cal. This is why my sister should return. Pen started to frown after seeing their actions. Count Ekros had become the #1 disciple of the royal mage because he was lucky enough to be talented in magic. Pen could not believe that Ekros would ignore him, even if he was a prince with no chance of succeeding the throne. At the same time, he was amazed at his sister's foresight. "Count Ekros will not listen to you. Then what should I do? You?" "Nothing. Just let it be. He is someone who at least cares a lot about the Breck Kingdom. What about young Master Cal?" His sister had laughed at that question. She laughed for a bit before finally responding back. "You don't need to worry about that person. The world's strongest mage is protecting him. The world's strongest mage." Those words had remained on his mind. Pen's gaze headed toward the feeble boy. The other person had been introduced as his guard knight in the past. The feeble boy flinched and turned away when they made eye contact. "Is he the mage?" Pen brushed aside his question as he looked back toward Cal. "And the Count?" Count Ekros opened up his arms and confidently asked Cal. "You don't even have a mage with you, so how are you going to install the magic bombs? We know more about the Gorge of Death, and we are mages, so we will do it." Count Ekros was serious. It was something to protect the Breck Kingdom. Even if he was not trying to take control, it made sense for him to do it. Although I feel bad treating someone who just arrived like this. He felt bad for doing this to Cal while he was still standing on the teleportation magic circle, but time was of the essence. He needed to quickly take care of this and return to the capital. The Count kept his arms open as he waited for Cal's response. It was at that moment. Are there more people in your party?" He could hear the voice of the mage responsible for the teleportation magic circle. Ooh-wong, the teleportation magic circle lit up once more. The Count looked toward Cal. "There are a few more people coming." Cal gently responded before stepping away from the teleportation magic circle. The Count stepped back in confusion and looked toward the magic circle. It slowly lit up until the entire magic circle was shining brightly. Approximately 10 huge people appeared. They were all wearing black robes, but each of them seemed as large as a mountain. The Count couldn't help but groan at the sudden pressure. It was at that moment. The person in front took off his hood. An old man's voice echoed in the area. "My name is Gashan, the Tiger Tribe's shaman." The other people took off their hoods as well. 10 pairs of feline vertical pupils started to shine in the darkness. The tiger tribe. The Count had never seen any members of the tiger tribe before. However, he knew that they were known as one of the strongest beast people tribes, Count Nim. Ekros flinched and turned around. He could see Cal. "I will leave the cliffs and high areas to your mages. We will take care of the deep areas." Deep areas of the gorge. That was where the winds were the wildest. It was difficult to fly through there with flight magic. The Count's expression changed. He had thought that they were just going to be installing magic bombs around the edge of the cliff, but Cal was telling him that they were going to be installing these bombs inside the gorge. "You are going to go underneath the line of death." The line of death. The gorge of death had different parts to it. The top part started at the cliffs and went maybe 10 to 100 meters below the edge of the gorge. That was where the gorge started. It was the location you could see the rough river at the bottom of the gorge. You needed to avoid that area if you did not want to die, but Cal was planning on going down there. "Yes, sir, we are going down there." His confident voice filled the area. The Count finally took the time to look around at Cal's party. All of them had grim expressions on their faces. Cal was the only one who looked calm. That was why it was so noticeable. Cal's comment about how the Roan Kingdom would take care of the deep areas of the gorge was stuck on the Count's mind. He could not figure out what to say. It was at that moment. "I will leave it to you." Prince Pen stepped in to respond. He then continued to speak to Cal in a respectful tone. "We will figure out the best way for you to go down there. Let me know if there is any way we can help." Cal gently smiled back to Pen. This was the thought on his mind right now. "I'm going to push off the magic bombs to these bastards." He needed to install the dragon's rage deep in the gorge. He couldn't let others know about that precious pillar of fire. Plus, it's not like I'm going to be doing the work. All he had to do was sit back and watch. How nice was this? Cal opened his mouth to speak. "Then we will head off first." Head off." Pen looked toward Cal in shock. Cal turned around and headed toward the gorge. The Count started to speak. "It is dangerous at night. You should move during the day." "Do you want the Northern Alliance to see what we are doing?" The Count shut up. The Wyvern Knights Brigade, he had heard about them. That was why time was of the essence. Those wyverns were capable of patrolling during the day. He could not say anything after seeing the gaze of the 20-year-old young boy who was looking back at him. Cal turned back toward the gorge after seeing the Count not saying anything. "Let's do it quickly and leave." Cal hurried forward and asked the tigers who were following behind him. "Is it dangerous at night?" Gashan started to laugh. "We prefer the night." Tigers were nocturnal creatures. They had also only brought the best of their warriors, so it would be easy for them to climb down the gorge. The mages of the Breck Kingdom rushed toward them. Cal stood in front of the first cliff and passed a magic bag over to Count Ekros. "There is a map of where to install the magic bombs and the bombs themselves. I will leave it to you, Count Nim." The Count felt odd after seeing Cal still remaining respectful. He received the magic bag and responded back, "I leave it to you." The Count could see Cal's confident smile. Cal then immediately gave the order, "Let's go." It was the moment Cal gave the order, plop, plop, the black robes all fell to the ground. The tiger warriors revealed themselves in their berserk state. "Ah," the Count stepped back. The pressure was considerably higher compared to before. Each of these tigers had ruled over a mountain in the past. The tigers did not hide their bodies that were shining black and gold in the darkness. Each of these huge warriors looked toward Cal. Cal started to speak. "Jump down." "Grrr, Gashan," the only white tiger, laughed. He then immediately jumped down. That was the beginning. The 10 tiger warriors all charged toward the bottom of the cliff. The white snow and the golden rays of light caught people's attention. The golden rays of light started to disappear as they suddenly heard some noises. Boom, boom, boom. The cliff started to echo. The tiger warriors were punching or kicking at the cliff. Grrr. The tigers' roars followed the whines up the gorge at the same time. Tigers enjoyed dangerous situations. Cal turned his head. He could see Choi Han standing there. "I will be back soon." "Sure." Choi Han also jumped off the cliff. Cal moved his hand after watching Choi Han jump. Pat. His hand was placed on Locke's shoulder, the wolf boy who was taller than him. Locke watched them. Locke could not respond to that as he looked toward the cliff. The image of the tiger warriors in their berserk state remained on his mind. He heard Cal's voice again at that moment. "I need someone to protect the Gorge of Death until I return." "Perhaps." Locke observed Cal's calm gaze. However, Cal did not say anything else before making eye contact with Locke and then turning away. Cal then looked toward the other people present that were looking at him. He could see the Breck Kingdom's mages. Count Ekros flinched at Cal's gaze. He suddenly had a question. Why do influential people like Rosalind, the Crown Prince, and Tunka keep someone like Cal at their side? However, he could not think about it any longer. Cal started to speak. "Please get started." Cal watched them flinch before quickly moving as he quietly stood there early the next morning. The sun slowly started to rise to the east of the gorge. The sun was shining brightly, as if the winter snow could do nothing to harm it. It was at that moment. Boom, boom. Cal started to smile. He could see a hand at the top of the cliff. A white tiger jumped back up to the top. "Young Master Nim, I am back. How was your late-night walk?" Gashin started to laugh at Cal's question. "Maybe it is because you are out here to greet me, but it was quite enjoyable, young Master Nim." The other tigers soon jumped up as well. Choi Han was the last to jump back up as he landed next to Cal. "I am back." "Good, you did we." Beep Cal, who was about to tell Choi Han that he had done well, stopped talking. Beep, Beep Cal turned his head. The tent. A noise that seemed to be signaling an emergency was coming from one of the tents. A magic video communication device was continuously glowing red. It meant it was a high-level emergency call. Cal entered into the tent. Prince Pen and the Count urgently rushed in as well. "Hurry up and connect it." Prince Pen gave the order, and the call was soon connected. Cal scoffed after listening to the message delivered through the call. "The Perun Kingdom, the Knight's Kingdom, is a kingdom of knights. Our knights follow the Knight's creed and do not do anything sly." The Perun Kingdom's declaration echoed through the Western continent. The Northern Alliance announced their declaration of war. "I didn't know they would act like this. He didn't expect them to be so open about it. Why are they doing this? It was probably not just because they were knights. They were probably scheming something, however, that was not the problem." Prince Pen and Count Ekros looked toward Cal. The Bear Tribe and the Flame Dwarves, they had not known about this. Their gazes subconsciously turned toward Cal. Cal was not looking at them. Cal, who was glaring into the video communication device, finally started to speak. "They're like dogs. Flinch." Everybody flinched after hearing Cal's comment. It was at that moment. Cal gave an order to Choi Han, who was standing behind him. "Contact the territory. They needed to hurry. Tell them to gather all of the nobles of the Northeast region." Cal gave the order for all of the Roan Kingdom's Northeast region nobles to gather. The Roan Kingdom's Northeast region, where the Hennetus territory was situated. It was the land with the most boulders in the Kingdom of Boulders. It was time for a leader of the Northeast region to finally appear. Chapter 194. Destroying it. 3. The message was delivered along with the rising winter sun, the Northern Alliance, Bear Tribe, and the Flame Dwarf Tribe. The name of this alliance of 3 kingdoms and 2 tribes was called the Indomitable Alliance. This information made the late winter of the Western continent hotter than ever. Beep, the calls kept coming in, as information was delivered to the tent Cal and Prince Pen were in. The Magoru Empire expresses their disappointment and states that they will work toward achieving peace on the Western continent. The expressions inside the tent did not look good. The Empire wants peace. What bullshit. There were many who flinched at Cal's comment, however. Nobody could say anything about Cal's actions or comments. "I feel like I am looking at my teacher." Count Ekros felt an unknown sense of pressure coming from Cal. It was as if he was looking at the overlord of an area. Beep, beep, yep, the calls continued to come in. The Caro Kingdom say that they will close all auction houses and casinos. The Caro Kingdom chose to hide. The 2 principalities in the north and the Conurbation have sent their support of the Indomitable Alliance's open proclamation. The Principality by the Empire and the Free City have chosen to take a stance of neutrality. They agree with the Empire's proclamation for peace. What a mess. Cal made that short observation before standing up. Clunk. The other people responded quite sensitively to the quiet noise. Count Ekros also got up and asked Cal a question. "Young Master Cal, did the Roan Kingdom know about the Bear Tribe and the Flame Dwarves?" Count Ekros was about to ask something else before he flinched and stopped. It was because of the way Cal was looking at him. "Human, why do you let that be? You really are a good person, I know the truth, even if you pretend you are not a good person." "Sigh, I guess I need to try harder." Cal did not comment back after hearing Rayon's serious voice. It was because he knew that he was a pretty bad person. That was why he was letting the Count's comment be. He needed to work the Count to the bone later on. Cal held back his sigh after seeing Count Ekros flinching at his gaze before responding back like a proper noble. "We did not." The short response lingered inside the tent. It was at that moment. Plop! The tent flap was opened and someone walked in. "Young Master Nim, what is going on?" It was the white tiger Gashan who was still in his berserk state, the tiger tribe. The bear tribe. The people in the tent started to think about those two tribes. Sunlight started to pour into the tent through the opened flap. However, only Cal remained in the darkness as Gashan was standing in front of him. That was the reason for it. It made Cal and his bright red hair stand out in the darkness. "Young Master Nim, what is going on?" Cal slowly started to answer Gashan, who asked one more time. "Nothing much." Beep Cal calmly continued to speak through the noise of the emergency calls coming in. "We just need to follow our original plan." His gaze turned toward Prince Pen. "We are strong as well." Prince Pen figured out what he needed to do as soon as he heard Cal's remark. Their alliance originally had 4 kingdoms and 1 tribe, but now they also had the Tiger tribe. Although there were some changes, they were not weak. That meant that what he needed to do was clear. He was currently the person representing the Breck Kingdom at this location. Prince Pen started to speak. "The mages responsible for the video communication devices will record all of the messages coming in. Also, report our current status to the others, Count Ekros." Yes, Your Highness." "I heard that there are still some magic bombs remaining. Restart the operation." He reiterated Cal's remark from earlier. Everyone will focus on their individual tasks. Prince Pen then looked toward Cal. He remembered what his sister Rosalind had told him. "He is someone you can trust. No, he is someone you can't help but trust." Pen remembered that comment as Cal started to speak. "Your Highness, I will be on my way as well." Pen nodded his head and Cal headed out of the tent. Prince Pen, who was watching the calm and confident Cal disappear into the light, brushed his neck with his hands after Cal left. "I feel like I can finally breathe." Pen could breathe in the cold morning air now that the pressure coming from Cal was gone. However, contrary to the cold air, his heart was beating hot and fast. This hot and fast business was the same inside the tent that Cal's group was residing in. However, there was no conversation ongoing. Tap, tap, tap. Cal's index finger was tapping on the armrest. He was thinking back to the novel, The Birth of a Hero. How annoying. Cal finally started to feel it. The 5th volume of The Birth of a Hero was over. Everything from here was a future that Cal had no knowledge of. That fact was giving Cal a headache. Cal pressed his temples with his fingers. "Human, do you have a headache? Are you sick?" The black dragon was floating around Cal with a look of concern. He was not invisible anymore as only their group was inside the tent. Gashan quietly observed the situation before slowly starting to speak. "The Flame Dwarf Tribe. I have never heard about them." Cal had never heard about them either. Well, Cal had never even met a dwarf other than the mixed-blooded dwarf Rat Mueller. That was why his mind was currently a complicated mess. Dwarves were a race that were known for making things. The reason for this complicated mess started to flow out of Cal's mouth. "There's more." "Excuse me?" Gashan asked back, but Cal finally felt as if his mind was clearing up. The Wyvern Knights Brigade, 10s of ships. If dwarves were added to this mix, the shape of the North's invasion via the sky and the sea would change drastically. There was more. Cal was certain that there was one other thing. He had no choice but to think that way. It was because he knew the truth about the Perun Kingdom's guardian knight household. He knew the truth about the god's Tears Lake. The Perun kingdom did not like the flowing river, and thus turned it into a lake in order to monopolize it. The Perun kingdom is not a fair and open kingdom. Cal opened his mouth to speak. We are returning right away. Yes, Cal Nim, I understand. Choi Han casually responded. Choi Han was the calmest person in the room. However, Choi Han's eyebrow twitched at Cal's next words. Locke, have you thought about it? Locke thought about it. Choi Han looked toward Locke after hearing something he did not know about. The young boy seemed to be the most uncertain person in the room since earlier. Locke flinched at the gazes focused on him before lowering his head. Locke immediately understood what Cal was asking. He had commented on it when the others jumped off the cliff yesterday. I need someone to protect the Gorge of Death until I return. He was not afraid of this stupid Gorge of Death. He had become stronger in order to protect others, and he was still getting stronger. However, he did not want to be alone. For Locke, who had never been alone, he needed someone to be the source of his courage, someone like his family or his siblings. Locke kept his head down as he started to think, I want to go back with you. He didn't want to be alone, but those words did not easily come out. What was going on? It was at that moment. Spit it out. Excuse me? Locke raised his head. He had heard this phrase before. It was when he went to thank Cal and ask him to take care of his younger siblings after his first berserk transformation. Cal had said that to him when he was fidgeting nervously and was unable to speak, spit it out, and then he said something else. Exactly what he was saying now. Yes. You need to make eye contact like this when you are chatting with someone. Did you forget? Did you forget? Those words sounded very loud to Locke. He had stuttered as he answered Cal back then. I am the older brother. I need to take care of my younger siblings. And I was a nephew and a younger brother. That is why I need to get revenge. Cal had responded to those comments. You're a wolf, wolf. That word stuck to Locke's mind. Cal Nim. Choi Han tried to interject into the conversation. Locke was like a younger brother to him. What is it? Could you please tell me what you asked Locke? I asked him to observe and protect the Gorge of Death until I come back. Alone? Some of the Breck Kingdom's mages will remain for emergency contact. But yes, he will be the only one from our group remaining here. Choi Han looked back and forth between Cal, who did not even turn to look at him as he responded, and the quiet Locke. Choi Han started to speak after hesitating for a bit. He is a child with a lot of loneliness. Locke had experienced trauma at a young age. His family, his neighbors, and his entire village were all massacred in front of him. Such a child was finally starting to relax. He needed to get stronger, but Choi Han did not want Locke's heart to turn empty. He didn't want Locke to go down the same path that he did. Choi Han knew that his heart felt that emptiness. That was why each and every drop of water that was wetting his heart was important. Choi Han did not want Locke to be lonely like him. Cal looked toward Choi Han at that moment. Is Locke alone? Excuse me. Cal turned back toward Locke and started to speak to the 15-year-old wolf teenager. You have family members. You also have a home to return to and a new hometown. Are you lonely? The wolf tribe cared a lot about family. However, a wolf needed to realize something. It needed to realize who they were. The Wolf King was someone who knew about their own existence. Locke, are you lonely? Locke heard those words differently. Are you still scared? Do you want to relax in a peaceful situation? You said you wanted to get stronger, so why are you still so timid and indecisive? Locke looked Cal right in the eyes. I will stay here. Locke then saw Cal smiling gently for the first time today. You grew. Locke could not say anything back. However, I trust you. He just bowed at Cal, who was telling him that he trusted him. He noticed an old and bloodied leather notebook once he raised his head back up. It is the final Wolf King's diary. Wolf King, Locke felt his heart beating wildly. His uncle, the chief of the Blue Wolf tribe, had died before he reached the level of the Wolf King. It made him think about his uncle. At the same time, he was confused. Why is he giving this to me? However, Cal's voice was like magic, as it answered his question before he could even ask it. I will trust you. A simple comment. However, that simple comment left Locke in a daze as he accepted the diary. He could feel the old leather in his hands. Locke then tightly held the diary in his arms. Cal watched Locke do this before giving the order to the rest of the group. Let's go back. They needed to return to the Rhone Kingdom, the territory that was the closest to the Rhone Kingdom and the start of the northeast region. The Wheelsman territory. Eric Wheelsman, the son of Count Wheelsman, walked through the banquet hall with an awkward smile. He could hear the northeast region's nobles chatting behind him. Even if it is the Hennetus household, can they really tell us to come and go in this state of emergency? I agree. Furthermore, it is not the Count, but young Master Cal who is calling us. A child without a title is calling us. My goodness! The Rhone Kingdom's northeast region did not have a duke nor marquis in charge. That was why there were several factions fighting for power. There were nobles like Eric Wheelsman's family, whose faction was focused in the northeast region. His faction included the northeast shores with young Lady Amaru and young Master Gilbert. The other factions chose to follow a duke or marquis in the southeast region, northwest region, the southwest region, or the central region. I also don't know why the crown has not said anything about it. I agree. It will be through the northeast region if they come by ship. It's not like they can come through the sky. The factions tied to the southeast region and the central region were the loudest. In times of peace, no baron nor viscount would dare to say such a thing about a count. However, they were running wild in this state of emergency, relying on their duke or marquis as backing. They were trying to take control of the northeast region for their faction. Eric let it go as he had expected such a response. In fact, it was weird that the southwest region and northwest region factions were quiet. This is weird. The northwest region's Stan household was now run by the eldest son, Taylor Stan. The southwest region's Jaira household was now run by young Master Antonio. The nobles following those two households were quiet with serious expressions on their faces. In fact, they seemed to be a bit scared. What is going on? It was weird, but Eric quickly left the banquet hall as he was still just a young master. He heard one of the nobles' complaints as he closed the door. He thinks he can run amok in such a time because we keep praising him as young Master Silver Shield. It was a complaint about Cal. Eric finished closing the door and started to frown. Just what is going to happen? Count Daruth Hennetus had gathered the northeast region's nobles. Let's determine the center. The nobles had responded to those words. War. That word also meant that it was an opportunity for a new power to step in. However, the Count who had gathered all of the nobles had sent Cal. Eric could not sleep once he heard about this. Although he did not seem like trash anymore, Cal was someone who still worried him. That was why he had sent a message every day but had not received a response. Eric finally decided to ask the Hennetus household's person standing at the entrance. Vice Captain Hilsman, when will young Master Cal be coming? I am not sure, young Master Nim. The vice captain's calm response gave Eric a headache. He thought about young Lady Amaru, who was responsible for the naval base. Young Master Eric, you don't need to worry about young Master Cal. To be honest with you, I am looking forward to what he does. Her gaze was sharp, as if she was looking forward to the war. Hey, really? Eric ruffled his hair and was unable to hide his anxiety. Cal, you punk, just what? What about me? Eric flinched. Tap, tap. He heard the sound of shoes hitting the marble. Eric turned around. He could see Cal leisurely walking from the entrance. He was his usually calm and relaxed self. This slow walking pace fit Cal more than anybody else. Cal walked by young Master Eric, who had sent him a letter a day while worrying about the war. I'll see you later. Eric turned back after hearing his comment to look at Cal's back. He had changed. Although he couldn't tell how, he could feel that something had changed. That was why he could not easily respond. Of course, Cal was happy that he didn't need to hear young Master Eric's concerned voice. Cal personally grabbed the handle to the banquet hall's entrance. It was a large door. The knight in front of the door urgently approached him and started to speak. Young Master Nim, I will do it. No need. I will do it myself. Cal pushed on the door, screech boom. The noise echoed throughout the entire banquet hall. Cal walked through that noise and into the hall. Tap, tap. He was the only one walking across the marble floor right now. All of the gazes of the northeast region's nobles were focused on Cal. Cal looked down at these nobles who were sitting down at the tables. Chapter 195. Destroying it? 4. Tap, tap. He stopped walking. He was in front of a long oval table. The head seat was reserved for Count Hennetus. Cal stood there but did not sit down. His gaze headed toward young Master Eric's father, Count Wheelsman, as he greeted him with his eyes. He had already discussed things with Count Wheelsman. Human? Rayon started to speak into Cal's mind. Rayon had arrived here first. Those shits talked badly about you. It is amazing. Do they not want to live? What a vicious 6-year-old. Contrary to his thoughts, Cal's expression was calm. He calmly looked down at the group. Ahem. Some of the nobles started to let out some fake coughs. It was because they felt uncomfortable having a young master like Cal looking down at them. It was at that moment. A viscount who was known to be part of Marquis Ainz's faction, the Marquis who was said to be ruling the southeast region in secret, started to speak. The Northern Indomitable Alliance will target the Rhone Kingdom. He was known to be a pretty intelligent and respectful noble. He did not seem to be ignoring Cal as he looked back and forth between Cal and Count Wheelsman. The Northwest region has banded together around Marquis Stan. The Southwest region is said to be spending a lot of money and manpower with the new Duke, Duke Antonio Jaira, at the center. The Viscount's gaze headed toward the Ubar Liege. Everybody knew about the naval base being built in the Ubar territory. It was a location that the Crown Prince's influence had reached. However, neither the Viscount nor the other nobles knew that the naval base was somewhere that the Hennetus household had a strong influence in. Although we have the naval base in the Ubar territory, isn't it not ready yet? Finally, the southeast region is going to move around Marquis Ainz. The nobles that were part of the capital's faction glared toward Marquis Ainz's faction's Viscount. Marquis Ainz's territory is known as having the strongest and largest knights brigade in the Rhone Kingdom. Ainz was currently the Rhone Kingdom's greatest swordsman. The Viscount started to smile. Our northeast region needs somewhere to center ourselves around. Wouldn't it be best to follow such a knight-centric region since we are going against the land of knights? Young Master Cal, doesn't Count Hennetus agree with our sentiments? The Viscount's gaze headed toward Cal, who was still standing up. He had heard about how the Hennetus territory had fortified its castle walls. However, he had not heard anything else from the territory. The Hennetus household currently did not have any justification for the others to center around them. It was at that moment. We have to think ahead. The eldest Viscount started to speak. This old man who turned 80 years old this year was part of the capital's central faction. We need to align ourselves with the strongest area. To be blunt, the northeast region needs somewhere to lean on. It is difficult to deal with on our own. The old man's egotistic gaze headed toward Cal. While young Master Silver Shield may be reliable, reality is different. The old man was trying to convince them with reality. We need to align ourselves with Duke Orsina in the central region in order to have things go smoothly. In the end, he was telling them to align with the central region. While war was a time when heroes were born and new powers were created, it was also a mess you had to survive through. The barons and viscounts all wanted to be heroes. Most importantly, we need to align with the central region that is the closest to the crown in order to increase our chances of survival. The knights and infantry are strongest in the southeast region. You should listen to this old man's experience, Viscount. Of course, these barons and viscounts wanted to be the heroes for their factions, not for the kingdom. Human, are they idiots? Wouldn't there be no nobles if the Rhone Kingdom is destroyed, of course? Cal agreed with Rayon's statement. That was why he was looking around. He was looking to see which nobles accurately interpreted the current situation, even if they aligned themselves with the southeast region or the central region. That was the reason he was dealing with such useless nonsense. Cal made eye contact with someone at that moment. It was the Ubar Liege, young Lady Amaru's mother. Her gaze was focused on Cal. The other nobles started to raise their voices at that moment. What would a barely 30-year-old viscount know? War is experience. I wish to listen to someone with experience. Does the crown or the central region have any strength? Logically speaking, we will only survive if we stick to the strongest group. He is right. It would be best to stick to the southeast region since we are on the same eastern region. The Ubar Liege started to speak through the chaotic table. Young Master Cal. Everybody focused their gazes on her, the naval base. She was the one who ruled over the land and sea with the naval base. This meant that she had the strongest force in the northeast region. Furthermore, the Northern Alliance was expected to come via ships. That made the Ubar territory even more important. The leaders of the southeast region and the central region had told their respective factions to draw the Ubar Liege to their side at all costs. That was why they were all focused on what she had to say. What do you think about the current situation, young Master Cal? The Ubar Liege used respectful language to address Cal. Cal quietly stood there without responding right away. The old Viscount scoffed at Cal. Ubar Liege, young Master Cal is young. It isn't as if he can protect the entire northeast region with a single ancient power. The clueless citizens may call him young Master Silver Shield, but what would a young teenager like him know? He then motioned toward Cal with his hand as if to say, no offense. Of course, young Master Cal is someone with a bright future. I truly believe that he is an amazing young man. However, this is something for experienced people like us to deal with. I agree. The nobles of the southeast and central factions all nodded their heads. Cal let out a chuckle at that moment. Are you laughing right now? The expressions of the nobles who had been nodding their heads started to stiffen up. Even if Cal was part of a count's family, their factions had marquis or dukes supporting them. Furthermore, they all had official titles unlike Cal. However, there was something they did not know. Cal had the crown behind him. He took a silver plaque out of his chest pocket and threw it onto the table. He was treating it as if it wasn't much. No, it really wasn't much to Cal. Clang. The silver plaque hit the table and started to spin. It spun until it moved to the center of the table and then stopped. Clang. Everybody looked toward the silver plaque. It had the crest of the royal family on it. All of these nobles had basic knowledge about this plaque. A silver plaque was related to control over the military. Why does he have this? Even the leaders of each of the factions had not received this. So why was this here? The nobles' expressions started to shake. It was at the moment that they were all silently focused on the silver plaque. Who do you think will win when a sword goes up against a shield? Unexpected words were coming out of Cal's mouth. However, his demeanor and gaze had changed. The respect was gone, and all that was left was a cold gaze that was looking down on them. Cal answered for the silent group. It will always be the shield. It had to be that way. The shield will always win from here on. Young Master Silver Shield. Cal was planning on using this embarrassing nickname of his to his advantage. Showmanship was important during war. It was a battle of spirit to survive. He needed to create that positive morale. He needed to instill a strong sense of spirit in the hearts of the Rhone Kingdom's citizens. Cal had decided to start that plan from the northeast region. He was planning on creating heroes for the Rhone Kingdom that way. Of course, not including me. After the war, the Rhone Kingdom that would be full of new heroes would forget about young Master Silver Shield. That was why it had to be this way. Absolutely. It needs to absolutely be this way. The shield had to win no matter what. It was at that moment. Boom. Cal felt his heart suddenly beating wildly. What is going on? It was the ancient power. One of the ancient powers was starting to move, you are right. The shield always wins. It was the owner of the indestructible shield. It was the voice of the glutton priestess. It had been a while since he had heard her speak. Actually, this was the first time since he earned the power. She started to speak in Cal's mind. I lost back then, but I will win this time. It is possible. What is she talking about? Cal hid his anxiety at this unexpected development. However, the tattoo of the shield over his heart was starting to heat up. But I'm hungry. The glutton priestess almost started to shout. More, I need to eat more. Again? Does she want to eat more bread? It was when Cal was calmly starting to think, I want to eat other people's talents. What? Boom? Boom! Cal could feel his heart beating wildly. The indestructible shield was starting to move. Although nothing was visible, that was what Cal was feeling. Human, why did you suddenly get stronger? What is going on? Cal was confused. However, his facial expression remained calm. Cal did not even look at the nobles who were looking at him as he turned toward the open door. Cal was using the dominating aura at its maximum capacity. Vice Captain Hilsman brought over a mage as soon as Cal called for him. Just what are you? One of the nobles started to speak, and the other nobles started to frown. However, the nobles tied to the southwest region and the northwest region all continued to look toward Cal with pale expressions. Cal naturally ignored the fact that the noble had something to say. Connect the video communication device. Where shall I connect you to? Cal answered the vice captain's question. The palace. The nobles flinched at that response. However, it was before they could even connect the call. Beep, the video communication device started to glow red. It was an emergency call from the palace. It was a message for all nobles. Furthermore, this message was currently being delivered from the capital's plaza for everyone to hear. The mage broadcasted the call on one of the walls of the banquet hall. They could see the current king of the Roan kingdom. Zed Crossman was standing at the plaza. He started to speak. I, Zed Crossman, will turn all duties over to Crown Prince Albrew Crossman and will pass the throne over to him next year. What? What the? Some of the nobles expressed their shock as they stood up. What the hell was going on? Their gazes then went toward the nobles of the southwest and northwest factions who had been quiet this whole time. They could see them quietly sitting there with pale expressions. It was at that moment. The call focused on Albrew Crossman. The crown prince, who still gave off the impression of the gentle and just prince, started to speak. Turn on the video. Video? A video was broadcasted behind Albrew with magic. Roar, grrr. The roars of monsters filled the banquet hall. The nobles could see monsters flying in the air. Although the video was shaking as if the informant had been in hiding when he filmed it, they could still see tens of monsters flying in the sky. It was the wyverns. They could also see knights on top of the wyverns. No way. One of the nobles' lips were shaking. He didn't even know that his voice had been shaking as he spoke. Ki-e-e-e-I. A wyvern rushed toward the informant. Some of the nobles gasped. The video ended at that moment. The Wyvern Knights Brigade, an existence from the legends. The nobles realized that the legend had become a reality. The Northern Alliance probably realized that their secret weapon had been revealed at this moment. Thanks to the Roan Kingdom, all of the Western continent was now aware of the Wyvern Knights Brigade. This was the reason that the Crown Prince had played this video in the plaza. Crown Prince Albrew looked into the video communication device and continued to speak. He knew that Cal Henetus would be listening to this from somewhere. He had been debating this for a while before making up his mind after hearing Cal's comment. Your Highness, the entire kingdom will become heroes. Albrew and the Roan Kingdom made up their minds at that moment. The Perun Kingdom had feigned being fair and just by claiming to be a land of knights. They would do the same. Albrew recalled what Cal had said. Your Highness, it isn't as if we are doing something bad. We are just pretending to be a fair and just kingdom. Funny bastard. The Roan Kingdom had made up its mind. They were going to fairly and openly suppress them with their strength. Albrew started to speak. His voice echoed throughout the banquet hall Cal was sitting in through the video communication device. The Roan Kingdom is the kingdom with the longest history on the Western continent. Although we may not have any specialties, we have the longest history. The Roan Kingdom had been the only quiet kingdom since the Indomitable Alliance's proclamation. The Roan Kingdom was the last to make their stance known to the others. We will show them the strength of the survivors. The Crown Prince confidently addressed the Western continent. At the same time, the banquet hall was filled with silence, no, with shock. They only just realized the truth. It was dangerous. They were relieved when they thought that the Northern Alliance would come via ships because of the Bear Tribe and the Dwarves. But wyverns? Now it was a question of life or death. They heard someone's voice at that moment. The wyverns. It was Cal. He looked down at the nobles who were looking at him. The Wyvern Knights Brigade will not get past the Henetus territory. He was speaking in a stern voice. Absolutely not. Cal walked over to the center of the table and picked up the silver plaque. I, Cal Henetus, am in charge of the Northeast region's military starting today. He was respectful in his speech. However, he left them no openings. "You will need to listen to me from here on out." Cal looked around at the nobles of the southwest and northwest factions who were avoiding his gaze, as well as at the nobles of the other factions who seemed to be in a state of chaos. If it is the nobles' way to attach themselves to the strong. The people who sought power in the eve of war did not deserve to be heroes. Cal was using today in order to determine the ones who would become heroes and the ones who would survive by attaching themselves to the strong. He needed to know this in order to utilize the nobles properly. Cal smiled toward the nobles. "Then you will soon have to decide who you need to attach yourselves to in order to survive." Cal turned around. He then headed toward the door without any hesitation. Screech, screech. The sound of chairs moving could be heard. The Ubar Liege, young Master Gilbert, who was representing his father, and Count Wheelsman. These were the people responsible for the Northeast region's shores and the entrance to the Northeast region. These people all stood up at the same time. They then followed behind Cal, screech bang. The rest of the nobles only realized that they had been left behind once the door was closed. They also realized something else. The wyverns were coming. That time would soon arrive. Chapter 196. There's a dragon. 1. The clouds of war covered the Hennetus territory. The western continent was quiet on the outside ever since the Rhone Kingdom's proclamation. However, that was just the calm before the storm. Rain City, the location of the Hennetus castle. The shoulders of all of the citizens inside the city were curled up in fear. The citizens who were walking alone or in groups of 3 or 4 all had odd expressions on their faces. Fear, worry, and even some other emotion were all visible on their faces. One of the citizens who had been walking with a friend pulled his jacket tighter because of the cold weather as he slowly looked around. He could see the newly fortified castle wall. It was a tall and thick wall. He could also see soldiers and knights walking around on top of the wall. The citizen's gaze then headed up to the sky. Someone with such a weak body is doing so much. His friend stopped walking and looked up at the sky as well after hearing him speak. The tall castle wall surrounded the entire Rain City. However, even that wall could not reach the sky. The citizens could see the cloudy gray winter sky. Wyverns are going to invade through the sky? They couldn't help but feel fear. However, there was a silver light that caught their attention even more than the cloudy sky, Rain City. This city could be considered to be small in size. A faint silver shield was currently surrounding the city. The other emotion that was visible on the faces of the citizens along with the fear and worry was relief. Didn't they say that he coughs up blood whenever he uses the shield? That is the case. His friend answered back with a calm expression. The citizen fixed his gaze up at the sky and started to speak. It's already been 3 days. The Rhone Kingdom's northern territories became the most dangerous locations after Crown Prince Alberu showed the video of the wyverns and claimed that the Rhone Kingdom would not lose. The northeast region was the region with the highest risk of attack, the enemy kingdom of Norland. The Hennetus territory in the northeast region was the closest territory to Norland that was across the Forest of Darkness. That was why the citizens could not help but be in a state of chaos. However, Rain City had been covered by a silver light starting from the night of the proclamation. They had no idea when the war would begin. The silver shield had not lost its light for even a moment during these past 3 days. Won't he faint if he uses such a large shield? Why doesn't he just activate it when those northern bastards come? His friend shook his head and responded back. Can't you tell? He doesn't want to see us or the territory getting hurt at all. He could not say anything to his friend's response. Looking up at the sky told him that this was true. Even the tall castle walls could not stop the wyverns. There were also only a few mages in the Rhone Kingdom who could attack something in the sky. That was why the weak young Master Cal was overusing his ancient power. The citizen's heart was running wild. At that moment, one of his other friends casually added on, I thought he was trash. The citizen could not help but shout toward his friend. Bad, how could you? A third friend added on. I looked into it, and they said that he was someone who threw bottles at gangsters. How is that being trash? Didn't he also break stuff? I heard he even broke down some store doors. Well, he could not retort his friend's statement. To be honest, young Master Cal really was trash. You could not erase or change your past. However, it was not enough to look down on his current sacrifice. He must have come to his senses. He is our young Master Nim now. You are right. Our Lord Nim is a good person, so his son, the young Master Nim, must have learned something from him as well. The citizen nodded to agree with his friend as he looked at the notices placed around Ainz City. He was one of the few people who knew how to read. This was the message on the notices. The Ainz estate had opened its warehouse doors. The amount of food they had stored was plentiful enough to give such a proclamation without having a certain end date. The citizen looked toward the castle gate. There were crowds of citizens who had come after hearing about the Silver Shield. This was the case even though the Wyvern Knights Brigade would definitely focus their attacks on Ainz City and not the rural villages. They still chose to gather together underneath the lord of the territory. Furthermore, there were many wheelbarrows filled with food from the Ainz warehouse heading toward different spots in the territory. There were also farming tools in some of the wheelbarrows. We need to start farming in the spring. The words Count Daruth had said while handing some farming tools to the citizens were spreading like wildfire. Those words symbolized a message in the minds of the citizens. After the war, during the springtime that would come after this late winter, they would be able to return to their lives at that moment. The citizen looked back up at the sky. I heard that he was working hard even though he is in pain. I pray that he is doing well. Cal Ainz. The man who was currently the military commander of the Northeast region was said to be struggling but continuing to keep up the shield. And this rumor had spread past the Ainz territory and the Northeast region to the rest of the Roan kingdom. Of course. So annoying. Cal Ainz had spread this rumor himself. Cal was currently using his bedroom in the castle as his office. He leaned back on a comfortable couch and started to speak. Young Master Eric Wheelsman should be doing well, right? I'm sure he is. Cal looked toward the smiling Ron and couldn't help but think that he was a scary old man. As for himself, he was a bad person. He had the military command, and yet he only gave orders. Once he did so, young Master Eric and the Ubar Liege followed his orders to create detailed guidelines to send to the territories. Furthermore, Ron was the first check for those guidelines, while Crown Prince Alberu was the second. Ron had once been the head of one of the top 5 assassin households in the Eastern continent. He was more experienced in military knowledge than Cal. Furthermore, Crown Prince Alberu was focusing everything on the Northeast region, which had the highest chances of being invaded first. It really is nice when other people do things for you. Cal was currently relaxed. Ron's smile became cold as soon as Cal's gaze moved away from him. His gaze was focused on Cal, who seemed to be drowning in documents as he thoroughly read through the guidelines and properly gave orders that matched the big picture. He could see Cal's pale expression. Tap, tap, tap. It had been 3 days. Rayon was hitting the floor with his tail from the corner of the room. On and Hong were doing the same thing. The Black Dragon was currently full of complaints. You stupidly good human? He's right. You're stupid. It's frustrating. On and Hong chimed in as well while Rayon continued to stare at Cal's back. Rayon had said that he would step up to destroy the enemies. However, this was Cal's response. No, you could be in danger if you show yourself. Cal had sounded very stern. Rayon had responded back to that. Who and what would put a great and mighty dragon in danger? However, Cal had no plans on revealing Rayon when he still did not know much about the crown that drank dragon blood. He had not had any time to meet the ancient dragon Iruhaben. Furthermore, he needed to create heroes this time. That would give those people a way to live a peaceful life. That would also help the Roan kingdom become stronger. Dark Elf, Necromancer, the Tiger Tribe, and the Ainz territory. Those were the names of the heroes Cal was planning on creating. He wanted to shake the hearts of the kingdom and the continent. An emotional story was necessary in order to do such a thing. Cal quickly looked through the final document before leaning back on the couch. The indestructible shield had definitely gotten stronger than before. Maybe it was because it did not need to block anything right now, but just keeping it up like this was not that hard. Of course, this was all thanks to the vitality of the heart. He was fine even without getting much sleep these days. Just 1 or 2 hours was enough to feel refreshed. Cal looked out the window with a satisfied expression. He could see the cloudy sky and the faint shield. It was at that moment. "Cal Nim, isn't it tiring?" It was Choi Han. Cal turned his gaze to the side. Why doesn't this punk ever age? He questioned how Choi Han still looked like a high school student, but decided that it was annoying to think about and brushed it aside as he answered Choi Han's question. "It is not that hard. I am currently writing a new history of the kingdom." Yes, yes, indeed. The original novel had been completely changed. That was why it was a new history. Usually doing such a thing would be cumbersome. Although it was cumbersome, it wasn't that hard on his body. Cal looked back out the window. Choi Han started to frown while looking at Cal, who was leaning on the couch with a pale expression and looking out the window. How could a person be like this? Choi Han could not understand. He touched his scabbard as he started to think. A new history. Choi Han focused on those words. Cal did not care as he casually lifted up the warm cup of tea that Ron brought over for him. It was a sweet tea that he actually liked. Cal peeked toward Ron, who had his usually benign smile. Cal started to think, I guess the old man is tired as well. He forgot to bring me bitter tea. Cal looked toward Ron with concern before turning his gaze away and drinking the tea. He took a large gulp since it was sweet. PFFFF, he then spat it all out. The black dragon stomped one of his short paws and flew up into the air. A black spot could be seen in the distance. And soon enough. Bang, the sky roared. Cal stood up while wiping away the tea from his face. The black dot almost instantaneously flew over and crashed into the sky. It was the wyverns. 1, 2. More black dots started to fly over to them. Boom, boom. The sky was becoming filled with these noises. Wee-ee-ee-ing, an emergency alarm went out throughout Rain City. The enemy was here. This casual afternoon would be the start of the war. Everybody, calm down. Move according to the guide knight's instructions. The knight shouted out loud as he directed the scared citizens to safety. The soldiers helped the citizens move to safety just as they had practiced in advance. Tap, tap, tap. All of the houses throughout the city closed their doors. They were expecting to hear the citizens locking their doors. However, no sound of doors being locked could be heard. Tap, tap, tap. The armored knights and equipped soldiers moved from the castle walls and throughout the city. However, none of this could be heard as well. Boom, boom. The noise of the wyverns ramming into the shield was too loud to hear anything else. Roar. The roars of the wyverns were the only other thing that could be heard in Rain City. The citizens of the city all had pale expressions. This was the first time they had personally seen a wyvern. Even the smallest one was at least 5 meters long. The knight on top who was controlling the large monster looked like a small dot. However, the knights who were wearing armor as white as snow seemed experienced in controlling these violent wyverns, making the soldiers and knights all gulp. Click, click. The citizens started to peek out their windows. Will the shield break? Does that mean we will all die? They were looking toward the castle walls with fear. It was at that moment. It is the young Master Nim? One of the citizens who was looking out the window subconsciously shouted. Cal had appeared on the castle wall. A bright silver light was coming out of both of his hands. Cal walked over to the center of the castle wall and reached his hands up to the sky. The knights and soldiers were watching him from the closest distance. This was their first ever war. A loud and firm voice soon reached their ears. The shield will not break. It was an armored Count Daruth. The usually mellow and average-looking Count's face was scary-looking today. Everybody focus. The pounding on the shield and the wyvern's roars were not as loud as the Count's voice. Cal listened to Count Daruth's voice and started to smile. He is surprisingly talented. It was the moment that he was evaluating his father's abilities. Bang! A noise that was louder than before echoed inside the shield. Cal started to frown. 15 meters. An extremely large wyvern looked down at Cal, who was inside the shield, and opened its mouth. It was impossible for normal wyverns to be 15 meters long. This white wyvern seemed to be a mutant. Cal started to speak. "You're here." He knew this person would come. He was waiting for this person on top of the white wyvern. The Perun Kingdom's guardian knight, the white-haired Clope Seca. He pulled the wyvern back and looked down toward Cal. The two of them made eye contact. Clope Seca looked down at Cal and started to speak. "Everything will crumble once we destroy the shield." He too had seen the Roan Kingdom's video. Clope had decided to destroy this longest surviving kingdom without any power first after watching the video. His pride would take a hit if he started anywhere else. It would seem as if he had been scared by the Roan Kingdom's proclamation if started anywhere else. That was why the Indomitable Alliance had selected the Roan Kingdom as their target. Furthermore, he had known about the slightly famous person in the Roan Kingdom. It was the son of a noble who used a silver shield. How interesting. Clope Seca looked at the shield that was giving off a faint silver light. Getting rid of this shield and that red-haired punk would start them off on a good note. That was why Clope had personally come. He was the one who would use his overwhelming strength in order to write a new legend. He blew into a flute. Beep tens of wyverns quickly flew toward him from a distance. The Hennetus soldiers all clenched onto their spears in fear. There were more wyverns than they had seen in the video, and they were all covering the sky above the Hennetus territory right now. The guardian knight looked down at the red-haired man. Did they say his name was Cal Hennetus? He would soon die. There was a limit to ancient powers. The guardian knight raised his hand. Descend. It was at that moment. Large-bodied individuals jumped off the wyverns behind him. They soon opened up parachutes that had never been seen before and safely landed on the ground. Boom, boom, boom. These large-bodied individuals started to line up outside of Rain City's castle walls. Their numbers were easily over 100. One of the soldiers let out a gasp. The Bear Tribe. The Bear Tribe was one of the strongest Beast People tribes and had the largest numbers. These large bears entered their berserk transformation and started to surround the castle walls. They were able to arrive here using the parachutes that the dwarves had made for them. Clope watched them land before lowering his hand and giving an order. Attack. The wyverns immediately headed toward the silver shield. The white wyvern headed down as well. Guardian Knight Clope could see the expressions on the faces of the people standing on the castle wall. The soldiers had pale expressions. He knew that the citizens must have the same expressions on their faces as well. He was certain that this would be an easy victory. This attack was stronger than any magic bomb or crumbling palace. Even this weak attack should be enough to destroy a small territory. He then made eye contact with Cal again. This was the end. Bang, bang, the banging noises were so loud it felt as if it could shatter their eardrums. How could we? One of the more cowardly soldiers plopped to the ground. The shield will break. That was what he was thinking. The soldier's gaze headed toward Cal. He could see the young master who was completely pale and looked as if he could fall at any moment. In fact, many of the gazes were focused on Cal right now. Cal started to think at that moment. The North really is a munchkin too. They were very strong. However, human, the wyverns are large, but they are weak. These puny things are kind of cute. There's a dragon here. The shield would not break. This was because it was covered by a dragon's shield. Something like a wyvern would not be able to break a dragon's shield. I can't reveal Rayon, but I can still put him to use. Cal continued to keep his shield up through the noise. Boom, boom. The wyverns rammed into the shield tens of times. It almost sounded as if they were beating on it like a drum. Ah! The fallen soldier let out a gasp. 1 time, 10 times, almost 100 times. The shield did not break no matter how many times they rammed into it. In fact, it only started to shine even brighter. The soldier repeated what the Count had said earlier. The shield will not break. The young master, who looked as if he could fall over at any moment, did not fall. Ha! Guardian Knight Clope let out a shocked laugh. It was stronger than he had expected. Contrary to his feeble-looking appearance, that young master's ancient power was stronger than he had expected. However, nothing had changed in his mind. A shield would eventually break. Furthermore, there were other places that they could hit other than the shield. Clope Seca. The guardian knight maintained his calm as he looked down at Cal. It was at that moment. Cal Henetus, he was smiling. Clope felt chills on the back of his neck at that moment. Behind me, the white wyvern urgently turned around. He had thought it was a white cloud at first. He thought a white cloud was descending from the sky, however, he was wrong. Bones, they were skeletons. Hundreds of skeletons. The skeletons of monsters were descending from the sky. These corpses were starting to fill the air. Cal started to smile. Too bad, this is just the beginning. He looked up at the sky and could not hide his smile. The forest of darkness, an existence started to rise up from the black swamp. It was the only skeleton with black bones. The bones without any hide started to flap its wings. Hundreds of skeletons were in the air. A large existence revealed itself through the skeletons in the air. That, the guardian knight's eyes opened wide. It was a dragon. Although it was just a collection of black bones, it was close to 20 meters in length. Just looking at it made it hard to breathe. The black wings that were multiple meters in length opened up in the sky. It was an overlord, even after death. Cal watched the dragon skeleton open up its wings. A battle with an overwhelming advantage was bound to be entertaining. Chapter 197. There's a dragon? 2. Beep beep, all of the video communication devices were consistently shining red. Basin Henetus, the second son of the Henetus family, looked out of the window of the information monitoring room. This room was located in the tallest tower of the castle. Although this should be the busiest room in the Henetus estate right now, everybody was just standing there with blank expressions. This was especially true for Basin, who was holding a video communication device in his hand as he stood there with his jaws dropped. Someone's voice could be heard through the video communication device. Ha ha ha, my goodness. Alberu Crossman. It was the voice of the Crown Prince. He was currently observing Rain City through the video communication device. He had seen Cal's shield, as well as the higher-than-expected number of wyverns. He also saw the hundreds of monster skeletons, as well as the dragon skeleton, that crazy bastard. He was thinking that Cal was a crazy bastard. However, Alberu felt the tips of his fingers going numb as he watched that crazy bastard through the screen. We can do it. It's possible. The entire Roan kingdom will become heroes. This crazy bastard had never said anything that he could not deliver. That was the reason Alberu had chosen to believe him, and the sight in front of his eyes was beyond his expectations. Your Highness, the Henetus territory will ignore all communication from the temples starting this moment. That was what Cal had said as he called forth the necromancer. Alberu had immediately responded back, I will take responsibility for it. Alberu mumbled to himself as he watched the large flying skeleton brigade heading toward the wyverns. Looks like I have no choice but to take responsibility. He then started to smile. However, there was someone else who could not smile at the current moment. It was Clope Seca, the guardian knight who was dreaming of creating the legend of the Sky Conqueror. He had a stiff expression on his face. Skeletons, he had never seen such a sight in his life. Captain Nim. One of the knights on a wyvern quickly approached Clope. The knight was staring at him through the helmet, however, Clope only saw the wyvern that the knight was riding. Screech, the wyvern let out a screech as it shook its head left and right. It seemed as if it was afraid. Fear. That word made Clope look past the approaching skeletons. He was looking at the large black bone dragon. This dead dragon was making the wyverns afraid. Clope lowered his head. Grr. He looked at the mutant wyvern he was riding on. This one was baring its fangs toward the bone dragon. It was acting as if it was looking at a prey. Clope tightly clenched on the reins around the wyvern's neck. Captain Nim? Clope started to speak as the knight called out to him once more. It is a necromancer. The long-lost necromancers were the only ones who could do such a thing. A necromancer? Such a cursed existence? The subordinate was shocked, but Clope quickly turned around. The subordinate stared at Clope before stepping back. Clope could see the smiling red-haired man. That smile angered Clope. That bitch is not a hero. A hero would never draw in a necromancer that uses dead mana. Clang. Clope took his sword out of the scabbard. Aura began to flow out of his sword. Sword Master Clope, he used his aura as he started to shout. Snap out of it! Ooh-woo-wong, his aura vibrated in the air. Flap, flap. His voice could be heard in between the flapping of the skeleton's wings. The knights tightly clenched onto the reins of their wyverns in response. Clope then blew into the flute once more. Beep, the wyverns' expressions quickly changed. The fear in their eyes had disappeared. Clope looked down and quietly mumbled to himself, "The bears will find the necromancer for us." He then started to speak loudly. His voice that was amplified with aura could be heard even inside of the Hennetus castle. They are just corpses that are being controlled. It definitely seemed to be a group of weak bones. Although there was a bone dragon, it was just like a puppet. Clope thought that Cal might have prepared the necromancer as a secret weapon. However, the Wyvern Knights Brigade was an existence beyond their expectations. In that case, Clope thought to himself as he started to speak even louder. What a great opportunity. It is a chance for me to become a holy hero. I can become a legendary hero, a god among men. A necromancer, a being that uses dead mana, was the perfect prey. They do not have any wills of their own. The Hennetus territory dared to call forth a dirty and evil necromancer? Gasp. The soldiers on the castle wall, especially the knights, gasped at Clope's comment. As learned individuals, they knew about the fear and loathing people had for necromancers. They could not help but look toward Cal. However, they soon had to turn their gazes away. Ooh-woo-oh, the guardian knight's white aura endlessly shot up to the sky. The knights of the Hennetus territory could not help but become aware of the existence of this sword master once again, as their expressions turned grim. Clope moved the reins. Our indomitable alliance will show you what justice is. Roar! The white wyvern rushed toward the flying skeleton brigade. Clope swung his sword, and the white aura cut through the sky. Slice, the skeletons that could not dodge disappeared without a trace. The skeletons disappeared almost instantly, as if any resistance was futile. Even if there were hundreds of these skeletons, tens of them disappeared from a single attack from Clope. The other knights jerked their reins as well. The wyverns started to roar once more. They definitely looked as if they deserved the title of being the conquerors of the sky. Clope, who was thinking that they had seized the momentum, looked back toward the red-haired man for a moment. He could see Cal's indifferent expression. Clope was about to start to smile. It was at that moment. Boom, 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 the bears started to stomp the ground. A bear with reddish-brown fur started to shout. Half of you go find the necromancer, find them and rip them to shreds. Boom, boom, the large bear stomped and started to laugh. The other half will destroy the castle walls? The knights could hear the bear's shouts. Clope finally started to smile. There was Clope who was smiling while the people of the Hennetus territory had grim expressions on their faces. There was a drastic difference in their expressions. However, the people on top of the castle walls heard some odd noises at that moment. Huh! It was a roar. The Hennetus territory was a territory that was surrounded by hills and stone mounds. Even Rain City, the central city of the territory, was surrounded by mountains. The roars were coming from the mountains. They were the roar of animals. The trees started to shake and the wind started to roar. One of the soldiers who was clutching onto his spear heard someone comment on the roars. They're late. Late. The soldier tried to look toward young Master Cal before he stopped moving. Large animals were headed toward them. No, they were people, but also animals at the same time. The tiger tribe. The tigers were all coming down from their mountains and preventing the bears from approaching. The soldiers could hear the knights starting to speak behind them. Many of the knights across the castle wall were shouting the same thing. They are the tiger tribe that moved into Harris village this winter. They are our fellow residents. The knights then took out their swords. The enemy will not get past this castle wall. We will not let them get past us. It was the moment that the knights holding their swords looked toward Count Daruth. Count Daruth looked toward Countess Violan, who had come out with armor as well. He looked down at the person who was being held in place by the Countess and asked, "We can get started, right?" "Oh, of course, Count Nim. I prepared everything. Hee hee." the mixed-blooded dwarf Rat Mueller. The sole successor of the household that developed the magic tower nodded his head. The knights lowered their swords as the count gave them the signal. Commence defensive formation. The knights started to shout, and the few soldiers who had been training since last year quickly proceeded to move. The soldiers with spears and bows followed them into the formation as well. Boom. Something was appearing on top of the thick castle walls. It soon became visible that there were catapults appearing on the castle walls. The large catapults started to aim toward the bears. These catapults that were equipped were all sorts of magic devices were Mueller's masterpiece. The knights started to shout. We are stronger on the ground. The atmosphere on the castle wall quickly changed. This scene made Clope start to frown. Just what the hell was going on? His sword, no, the aura around his sword, swung forward to destroy even more skeletons. The bone dragon behind the flying skeleton brigade was just floating there without doing anything. These stupid bones aren't the problem. There are tigers that don't exist in the Western continent, and what the fuck is up with those catapults? Why does a rural territory, a stupid territory with nothing but rocks, have all of these things? Although it wasn't the capital of any kingdom, it seemed better equipped than most capitals. Clack, clack. One of the smaller skeletons that had lost one wing was flapping its other wing as it roamed around Clope. Clope started to get angry. He couldn't let it continue like this. Clope looked at the still numerous skeletons as he turned his wyvern around. He could see Cal smiling once again. I need to get rid of that bastard first. It was a matter of momentum. Beep. Beep, the white wyvern's black pupils started to change color. They became as red as fire. The wyvern then started to increase its speed as it charged toward Cal. Clope lowered his head in order to stick close to the wyvern. They were moving at an extremely fast speed. However, he was still smiling. Cal was still smiling at them. He looked toward the approaching white wyvern and started to speak. Come. The bone dragon that had been still this whole time finally started to move. The person behind Cal started to move as well. The invisible Mary was moving her hands. Her face was pale as she controlled the bone dragon. However, there wasn't even an ounce of hesitation in her movements. These bones were all just decoys. The flying skeleton brigade suddenly screeched and started to run. However, that started to move without making any noise. The bone dragon's empty eye sockets suddenly lit up with black glow. It then quickly started to fly toward the shield. The bone dragon opened its mouth as it aimed for the white wyvern's neck. Shit! Roar! The white wyvern revealed its fangs as it tried to fight back. However, the black-eyed bone dragon did not get pushed back even though it was just a pile of bones. Ugh! Clope urgently pulled on the reins. Flap, flap. The bone dragon opened up its wings in front of the Hennetus castle wall. Anybody would think that this sack of bones was guarding the Hennetus castle. Bang, bang. The white aura clashed with the black light. The white wyvern's claws and teeth rushed toward the bone dragon at the same time. However, the dead mana just shook rather than disappear. The bone dragon did not even have a scratch on it. Ki-e-e-e-I, the shield began to shake once more as the wyverns started to ram into it again. They seemed focused on destroying the shield. The wyverns that now all had red eyes even tried to rip the shield apart with their claws. However, Cal still remained calm. Choi Han. Cal started the last step of his plan. Yes, Cal Nim. Choi Han did not say anything else as he stood next to Cal. Cal got rid of the silver light connected to the shield from one hand as he continued to speak. It's your turn. There was something for me to do? Cal had not told Choi Han what he needed to do. That was why Choi Han had been standing by Cal's side like a shadow in order to protect him. However, Cal had determined what Choi Han would do a long time ago. Use all of your strength. Is this the new history that you were talking about? Choi Han could see Cal smiling with a pale expression at his question. However, Cal's calm voice answered Choi Han's question. Yes, it is your history that you will write in this place. My history that I would write in this place, my second hometown. Those words were echoing in Choi Han's mind. The soldiers around them looked toward the pair in confusion. They were wondering what the two of them were doing during this emergency situation. Cal took a sword out of a magic bag at that moment and pointed the handle toward Choi Han. It was a sword that Mueller had forged. It's yours. Cal was planning on giving Choi Han his original role in the novel. This would be when Choi Han becomes a hero. The birth of a hero. The 5th volume may have ended, but all he had to do was create a new opportunity for the birth of a hero. I'm sure you know best what you have to do. Cal looked toward Choi Han and gave him an order. Come back soon. Choi Han received the sword from Cal. He did not debate it much before taking it out of the scabbard. The blade was shiny, unlike the scabbard. Choi Han smiled brightly toward Cal. I like this sword. The sword started to rumble at that moment. Black hair and black eyes. An aura the same color as the teenager-looking man's eyes and hair started to cover the sword. Sword master? The soldier gasped before covering his mouth. The black aura was shooting up into the sky. Sword master? The young man who was known as Cal's guard was actually a sword master. Necromancer, sword master, and the Tiger tribe. Then there was Cal who was giving them orders. A different emotion other than fear was giving the soldier the chills. It was at that moment. I will kill him and return. Choi Han calmly stated what he needed to do. His role was to kill Guardian Knight Clope. Kill Clope, or at least the white wyvern that he is riding on. However, Choi Han suddenly saw Cal motioning toward him. Cal was even stuttering a bit. Let's hug before you go fight. Hug. In the middle of a battle, Choi Han wondered if Cal even had such an affectionate side. He gave a light hug to Cal, who was still keeping the shield up with one hand. Cal shouted in a loud voice in order for the others to hear. I trust you. Choi Han suppressed his emotions as he answered back. Thank you very much. I will definitely return with his head. Why is this punk saying such a thing? Cal whispered in a quiet voice so that others could not hear. Don't kill him. Why waste such a useful pawn and kill him right away? Cal looked toward Choi Han, who was still so innocent, albeit hanging out with him for so long, as he continued to speak. His voice sounded wicked. Pick up both of those white things. Ah, Choi Han let out a gasp. Cal's expression seemed to be saying that it was obvious. It would be a waste to kill him right now. Shouldn't he at least figure out how to control the wyverns before killing Clope? Furthermore, there was so much money to be made if he caught that bastard. I will successfully complete this mission. Choi Han jumped off the wall through the gap that Cal opened up in the shield for him. His feet then landed on the black bones of the bone dragon. Tap. Choi Han lightly jumped on top of the bone dragon. He stood up straight and looked toward the two white things. Choi Han, whose senses were beyond the limits of normal human hearing, heard Cal's faint but firm voice. Start. Cal gave the order. The still anonymous sword master and the dragon, an existence that had been forgotten about in the world. The two beings who would soon be recorded in the continent's history started to move following Cal's order. Chapter 198. There's a dragon. 3. Guardian Knight Clope Sekka could not believe it. There was a black bone dragon and a black-haired sword master standing in front of him as if they were guarding the Hennetus castle. Now there is even a sword master. How could there be such a crazy territory? The fact that they did not have the Roan Kingdom's royal crest made it seem as if all of these forces belonged to the Hennetus household. Clope's expression stiffened up. It was at that moment. Captain Nim? One of his subordinate knights approached him. It was the same one that had come up when the Flying Skeleton Brigade had first appeared. He was the only one who was allowed to come to talk to Clope. What is it? Clope kept his gaze locked on Choi Han as he answered back. The subordinate started to speak. It was a voice that was full of trust. It seems like someone like you, who will become a legend, will always have tall walls to climb. Clope's expression became odd. Fear and greed both filled his face. He then gave an order to his subordinate. Put all of our strength into destroying the shield. Yes, I understand. The knight stepped back as Clope raised his sword into the air. The white aura shot up to the sky even farther and brighter than the black aura. An aura was the sword master's identity. It followed the owner's personality. That was why the Guardian Knight trusted his strength over that black-haired punk. It was at that moment, grrr, the white wyvern roared as well. Choi Han shouted in order to be heard through that roar. Come. Ha, what an arrogant kid. The white light turned into a ball and charged toward Choi Han. The black bone dragon started to move as well. It felt as if the entire heaven and earth was shaking. The black light clashed against the white light and let out a screeching noise. Roar. The white wyvern's claws scratched at the bone dragon's bones. It then tried to bite down on one of the dragon's wings as well. However, it was futile. Scratch, the claw could not scratch the bones of the bone dragon. The wing bones also did not break. This was an existence that stood above all other existences in the world. Both the whale tribe, the rulers of the ocean, and the bear tribe and lion tribe that aimed to be the rulers on land were called tribes. Only dragons were called dragons, and not the dragon tribe. It was not because they were large or strong. They were a different class of existence. The white wyvern screeched. It started to bleed as one of its claws broke off. This white wyvern was a mutant that was stronger than the other wyverns. That was why it believed that it could destroy this bone dragon. Although a living dragon might be difficult, this was a dead dragon that only had its bones remaining. Unfortunately, there were no monsters that could break a dragon's bones, an existence at a lower class. That was not only the case for the wyvern. Choi Han's sword easily blocked the white aura. He then observed Clope Seka's face. Bang! The white wyvern did not give up as it slammed into the bone dragon with its whole body. It was doing its best to turn the bones into rubble. The two swordsmen clashed once more as the wyvern crashed into the bone dragon. Clope was wily. The white aura slithered like a snake and charged toward Choi Han. In contrast, Choi Han's black aura went straight forward. It instantly cut the neck off of the snaking white aura. You're not too bad. Clope still believed in his longer and brighter aura as he mocked Choi Han. However, there was no change in Choi Han's expression. This lack of response made Clope start to frown. I guess someone like me needs obstacles like you in order to create my legend. Twitch. Choi Han's eyebrows twitched at that comment. The bone dragon and the white wyvern moved away after ramming into each other. It was the moment that Clope started to smirk after seeing the change in Choi Han's expression. I was going to quietly take care of you since you were so annoying, but you are speaking such nonsense. What? The guardian knight was at a loss for words after seeing Choi Han's gaze that looked as if he was looking down at him. Choi Han was indeed looking down at him for being an arrogant bastard. Choi Han's black aura started to grow dimmer. It continued to grow dim until it became a lightless darkness. The aura matched the personality of the user, a lightless darkness. That was the true nature of darkness, as well as the true nature of Choi Han that he developed in the Forest of Darkness. Choi Han had now chosen to accept that nature thanks to a certain someone. His aura continued to grow dimmer. Choi Han could not sit still after hearing the things this clueless person was saying. He thinks he will create a legend. Choi Han pointed the darkness toward Clope and started to speak. You are not the one who will create a legend. That role is already reserved for someone else. Legend. A new history. The history I will make in my second hometown with my second family. There was already an owner for that new history. Only that person had the qualifications to do such a thing. What? Clope asked in disbelief. However, he suddenly felt the back of his neck becoming cold. Choi Han's blade now had only a small amount of light left on it. This was his current limit. He knew that he would walk a new path of the sword the day that he could make his sword go completely dark. Choi Han shared the future he was going to make to Clope. I will create the path for him to get there. The path for that person to become a legend. He would be the one to create that path. That was Choi Han's determination. Mary was the only one who could hear this conversation. The necromancer who was controlling this bone dragon that was a higher class of existence was pale. A dragon's bones change colors based on their attributes. That was why it was difficult for her to control these special bones. However, Mary's dead mana had dyed the area where the white crown, the one that gave Cal the dominating aura ancient power, used to rest. She had managed to do it. She was the only one who was connected to that bone dragon right now. That was why she became the dragon's ears and listened to the conversation. She could clearly hear Choi Han's voice. The legend, I will create the path for him to get there. Mary's gaze headed to the front. It was focused on Cal, who continued to keep the shield activated. She could even hear his quiet mumbling. What the hell are they talking about instead of fighting? It was said quietly so that others could not hear. However, Mary was able to hear it. Although his comment made him sound unreliable, Mary could clearly see what Cal was going through. His back was drenched in sweat. His shoulders were slightly shaking. She knew that young Master Cal was the one who was struggling the most right now. He was always like this. For Cal, it was hard to maintain this posture of keeping his arms out to pretend that he was forcing himself to keep the shield active. He felt as if he was being punished, and his arms that were weaker than before were shaking in pain. However, Mary looked at Cal's shaking hands as she remembered what Cal had told her 3 days ago when he activated the shield. Don't leave our side. The number of people who want to harm you will increase the moment you use your powers for our territory. But Mary had already made up her mind. She was more than willing to do this much for the people who showed her a beautiful world outside of the underground. Shielding her presence and hiding away was her specialty. However, her thoughts had changed after hearing what Cal had said, but you do not need to worry. You are not someone who should live in hiding. I will let you live as you want. Cal's words had shaken her heart. Mary's hands that were covered in black blood veins started to move again. Swoosh, a strong winter breeze blew by them. Mary's black robe was fluttering. It felt as if her hood would fall off from the wind, however. Mary did not push her hood back down with her hands. There was something more important to do. Nobody else could see her because she was currently invisible. However, one person could feel it. Choi Han looked down at his feet. Black balls of light started to gather together in the bone dragon's bones. It was dead mana. It was Mary's power. The black lights that had only been at the bone dragon's pupils beforehand started to expand to cover the bone dragon's entire body. They then converged at the bone dragon's heart. That made Choi Han instantly realize it. He could understand what Mary was trying to say. You feel the same way. You and I are trying to walk the same path. It was times like these that made Choi Han truly feel that he was not alone. How could he fear anything in such a situation? Choi Han reached his hand out. The bone dragon started to move in rhythm with him as if it had become his feet. The swordsman and the dragon, both were moving as one. Boom! The pair were not very loud. Roar! The dragon's fangs bit down on the white wyvern's neck. Slash! The white aura was instantly cut at the same time. Clopé's eyes turned wide. The lightless darkness soon covered his sight. Ki-e-e-e-I! Blood started to spurt out of the white wyvern's neck. The bone dragon's claws stabbed through the blood. Its claws were clenching onto the white wyvern's neck. Choi Han grabbed onto the bone dragon's neck bone. Mary, let's go up. Mary responded to his statement. Flap, flap. Her dead mana spread like spider webs in order to create wings for the bone dragon. Mary's eyes started to become covered in black thread-like blood veins. However, she did not stop. She was currently growing. She was about to overcome a wall, her hands clasped around the neck she could not see. Grrr. The white wyvern's neck started to become dyed black. Ugh! Clopé pulled on the reins in order to regain his balance. His white aura then shot out toward the bone dragon's front paw. However, the bone dragon started to flap its wings. It was going up. The bone dragon continued to keep the white wyvern in its paw as it shot up farther and farther into the sky. Choi Han was stationed at the bone dragon's head as it flew up. One of the knights standing on top of the wall could not help but comment. Dragon Knight. The knight's heart was going wild as he said that. It was a title that held a significant weight that was incomparable to that of a wyvern knight. The knight's gaze was focused on the sky. The direction of this battle would turn based on the result of the battle between the bone dragon and the white wyvern. It was at that moment. Bang! A loud noise made the knight open his eyes wide. Cal, who was watching, could not do anything as his jaws dropped. One of the stone mountains lost its peak. The bone dragon had slammed the white wyvern into the mountain. Dragons really are strong. Wyverns are as weak as a tiny tree branch. But I, the great and mighty dragon, Rayon Meru, am even more amazing than that bone dragon. Cal listened to Rayon's excited voice as if it was background music as he nervously chuckled. I hope they didn't kill him. Cal nervously looked toward the stone mountain while hoping that he did not lose out on a pile of gold. GRR. There was blood coming out of the wyvern's mouth. However, the wyvern could only flail around. It could not get up. The thing that had slammed it into the mountain, that stupid bone dragon, was stepping on its head and looking down at it. Ugh. However, Clope was still fine. He had jumped away from the wyvern the moment it was thrown and managed to land safely. However, he continued to grow his aura. Slash. It happened again. His white aura was slashed again. No matter how hard he tried to wrap around Choi-Han like a snake, his sword could not cut him. That person had followed him right after he had landed on the ground. It looks like your sword is a white snake. It suits you better than the wyvern. Clope started to shiver after hearing Choi-Han's calm voice. A white snake. That was the true symbol of the Sekka household. The qualifications for becoming a guardian knight rested with such snake-like characters. Why, you nameless bastard dares to go against a guardian knight like myself. Clope's sword charged toward Choi-Han once again. However, Choi-Han only had 2 words to say. So annoying. That was it. Clope could see the darkness approaching him once again. The white snake's body was gobbled up by the darkness. Clang, Clope's sword fell to the ground. My arm? Ugh. There was no longer an arm attached to Clope's right shoulder. His neck was then choked by the black-haired man, just as the bone dragon had done to the white wyvern. He could not breathe. The pain from being unable to breathe made it so that he could not feel the pain from losing his arm. He heard a cold voice at that moment. Tell the wyverns to stop. Choi-Han was giving him an order. He took out the flute from Clope's pocket and motioned to him with his eyes. All he had left to do was to return after successfully fulfilling Cal's order. He had caught both the white wyvern and the guardian knight alive. He did not kill either of them. Ugh, ugh. He could hear the guardian knight gasping for breath. Choi-Han's expression changed. The guardian knight was shaking his head. Maybe it was because he could not breathe, but he was crying like a baby as he shook his head. This suddenly made Choi-Han question the details. How could a white snake control a wyvern, and aura was the user's identity? A white snake could not control a wyvern. Choi-Han turned his head. He immediately jumped back on the bone dragon and shouted to Mary. We need to go back. There was more. This was not it. The bone dragon flew back up into the sky. Choi-Han then heard a noise. He heard a whistle. Someone was quietly whistling. It was the helmet-wearing knight, the only one that was allowed to talk to Clope Sekka. He was the one that was whistling. The wyvern underneath the bone dragon's feet started to run wild. The wyvern struggled so much that its veins started to pop out. It was moving as if it had forgotten about fear and death. The wyvern that had no energy to move tried to slowly crawl through the ground. Damn it! Choi-Han and the bone dragon started to fly toward the helmeted knight. However, the knight moved first. The other wyverns all charged toward the shield. Bang! Bang! They could see the wyvern's wings, claws, and arms breaking apart. However, the wyverns did not stop. They were trying to cut through the shield as if they had gone crazy. The silver shield started to become drenched in red blood. Human, the wyverns seemed to have gone nuts. How cute! But Cal could not hear Rayon's voice. The guardian knight is not the one that controls the wyverns. It was the guardian knight in the novel. Cal realized that there were things that had not been revealed in the first 5 volumes. The helmeted knight. He had no knowledge about this person. That knight got on a wyvern and headed toward Cal. However, there was nothing in the knight's hand. It was at that moment. Human, something is weird. I can feel the power of nature on him. What power of nature? An ancient power. Cal could see a sword starting to appear in the helmeted knight's hand. He could easily tell what it was. That was a sword. It was an ancient power in the shape of a sword. That sword continued to get longer and wider. It almost looked like a spear now. It was at that moment. Boom. Cal could feel his heart start to beat wildly. He then heard the voice of the glutton priestess. You will block it. The shield started to shrink. What the hell? Cal could not speak properly. His entire body was heating up. He was not in pain, however, it was getting hard to breathe. The ancient powers were roaring inside of his body. The tattoos around his body felt as if they were on fire. The shield continued to shrink as that happened. The silver wings disappeared as well. They continued to shrink until it became a tiny shield. However, Rayon's shield continued to prevent the wyverns from coming in. At that moment, Cal could see the helmeted knight starting to smile. Try blocking this. The helmeted knight slowly threw the sword. The large sword that had become a spear shot down toward Cal. Human, something is weird about it. I will create more shields. Rayon created more layers of shields until there were 4 total layers. However, something still felt off. It felt as if magic would not work on that sword. A natural disaster. This was the term for the most dangerous things in nature. Hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, hail. These were all natural disasters. Looking at that sword made Rayon think about that term. It was something that had the destructive forces of nature in it. The 6-year-old dragon's instincts were telling him something. It was saying it was not possible to block the sword with magic. The only thing that could block that sword was a dragon's breath or a dragon's body. It had to be the sturdy body of a creature that was in a class of its own. There were only a few seconds before the sword would hit Cal. Rayon's eyes were focused on Cal during those few seconds. His body subconsciously started to move forward. It was at that moment he could hear Cal's voice. "Fuck!" That shout made Rayon return to his senses. He then started to shout. "Mary, call the dragon." Rayon increased the number of shields. 5 layers, 6 layers. The black dragon that had yet to go through his first growth phase and could not use dragon's breath was reaching his limit. Crack. However, the natural disaster easily destroyed the shields the moment it touched them. A shield like this was a child's toy to this destructive natural disaster. 1, 2. The shields quietly started to disappear. I just need to resist. I just need to resist until Mary's dragon gets here. Rayon created new shields whenever a layer was destroyed. He then heard Cal's voice. "Enough." Rayon flinched. He then looked toward Cal. It was at that moment. Bang! The people on the wall could not do anything as they heard the loud noise and a flash of light. The last thing they saw was the black bone dragon ramming into the large sword. Once their vision returned, they could see that the dragon's bones were breaking, although it had caused a crack in the sword. However, these lifeless old dragon bones were not enough. They were not enough to destroy the sword. Rayon could see that this was the case. This 6-year-old baby dragon that lacked experience sensed danger for the first time. Rayon's body started to move. He heard Cal laughing at that moment. Rayon turned his head. He could see Cal coughing up a large amount of blood. Cal was bleeding from his mouth, nose, and ears as he continued to laugh. A voice was going off inside of Cal's mind. "Isn't that my sword?" It was the previous owner of the dominating aura. He was the one that was speaking. That's the dragon-slaying sword. Cal realized it at that moment. Dragon Slayer. That helmet's sword is the dragon-slaying sword. That was the reason it had managed to destroy the bone dragon. He then thought about the crown he had stolen from the north. It was the white crown that looked similar to the crown that had disappeared when he gained the dominating aura. It was the crown in his magic bag that was said to like dragon's blood. The sword and the crown. Cal realized that they must be a pair. That was the reason the crown had been in the north. There was one more thing. He realized this fact as if his instincts were telling him. It was the faint vision of the future that the World Tree had seen. It was one of the 3 things the World Tree had told him. This was the 3rd thing, aside from Rayon's parents and the Water of Judgment. The person who is collecting ancient powers has collected a total of 3 ancient powers. It must have been talking about this helmeted bastard. "You son of a bitch." Cal clenched his fists. His whole body was shaking. "Rayon, don't move." Cal shouted toward the invisible baby dragon as he focused on the words in his mind. "Are you trying to sacrifice yourself?" "No. I will never hurt myself for others." Cal ignored the Super Rock's question. Instead, he focused his thoughts on the words of his fellow glutton, the glutton priestess. He could hear her voice. "This is enough. The tattoo on Cal's heart had changed. The silver shield tattoo had received a heart in it when he had received the vitality of the heart. That red heart was slowly turning silver. The shield had eaten up the first power. Cal poured out as much of the shield as possible, a natural disaster, and the vitality of the heart. It was the restoration power of the human who did not want to live. The power of a human to overcome natural disasters came from their vitality and their desire to live. Bang! Although there were cracks on the still large sword, the tip of it still ran into the tiny shield. A light brighter than the one earlier covered the entire Hennetus territory. Cal could see Choi Han jumping behind the helmeted knight like a devil before he lost his sight. He could also feel Rayon supporting his back with his paws as he heard the priestess's voice. Good job. Cal quickly realized it. He had blocked it. The power of restoration and the will to live. It was the power of humans who managed to survive through all sorts of nature's attacks. The shield did not break. Chapter 199. There's a dragon. 4. The highest point of the Hennetus territory. Basin was still in the highest room of the castle tower. Hayu Hyung Nim? Basin's shout echoed out. He was holding onto the rails with one hand as if he was about to jump off the tower in order to rush toward Cal. He was looking at the origin of the flash of light. Basin Hennetus heard a noise just as his sights returned. Crack. The large sword that had received a crack prior to the attack. That sword slowly cracked completely before disappearing into the air. A few of the wyverns that touched the specks of the disappearing sword instantly turned into ash. However, something else caught his attention before he could feel fear about what he had just seen. He saw the shield. The extremely small shield did not break. However, there was a crack where the sword had hit it, as if it was going to instantly break. In fact, the shield had cracks all over it. It looked ready to break at any moment. He then saw his Hyung Nim, Cal Hennetus. Beep, beep the information communication room. All sorts of emergency calls were flooding in. There were especially a lot of calls from all over the northeast region. Many video communication devices were currently connected to the Hennetus territory. They had seen the battlefield through the screen. However, Basin could not hear any of those loud noises. All he could see was his Hyung Nim, who was barely managing to stand. He could also see the black blood Cal was coughing up. The 17-year-old Basin felt the pain of war for the first time in his life. It was at that moment. Basin Hennetus. He heard Crown Prince Alberu's voice. He had not heard it properly the first time, however. The significantly dry voice quickly brought Basin back to his senses. What did your Hyung Nim order you to do? Basin raised his head. He recalled what his Cal had told him. He turned his head and looked around the information communication room. This was currently the center of information for the entire Rhone Kingdom. Information was the most important factor in a war. If you do not want to be embarrassed, no, if you do not want to regret this in the future, do not forget your task. Although Alberu was saying this to Basin, he was saying it to himself as well. Alberu's face that was visible through the screen was bloodshot as he focused on what was going on in the Hennetus territory. He said one more thing to Basin. The 1st Brigade of the Royal Knights and the Mage Brigade are currently heading toward the Hennetus territory. Cal Hennetus had told him to wait. However, the Crown Prince started to play his part in order to not be embarrassed or regret things in the future. The Rhone Kingdom's Mage Brigade took their first step to show themselves to the world for the first time. Basin also started to order the knights responsible for the video communication devices. We are going to start accurately relaying the information about the enemies to the entire Rhone Kingdom. His brother had told him something 3 days ago, the same night as the Crown Prince's proclamation. We are the first line. His brother's voice was clearly reappearing in his mind. He said that the first line was extremely important. If people hear about how we survived and protected the castle, the morale of the Rhone Kingdom would change. We need to etch the image of victory in the minds of the citizens. That is the way for us to win the war. His Hyung Nim had been his usual calm self as he said this. That is the way for all of us to survive. The person who had said that was barely hanging on right now. Basin gave an order to the mages. Let's accurately relay how we win this battle. The morale of the Rhone kingdom will change positively from here onward. Basin firmly believed that to be the case. He lowered his head to look toward the castle wall. The mixed-blood dwarf Rat Mueller was currently on top of the wall. He had opened his eyes after hearing a noise as well. Crack! The castle walls! There were cracks appearing on the castle wall, the walls that I developed. This cowardly yet prideful mixed-blood dwarf rat had an emotion other than fear in his eyes. However, he could only gasp as the Countess still had her hand on his neck. Gasp! He was flung aside. Mueller felt his body being flung to the side. He then heard a scream. Cal. Countess Violan was screaming. He also heard Count Daruth shout as well. Everybody focus! Mueller raised his head. The always calm and gentle Count's expression was extremely ugly. The Count had veins popping out of his forehead as he gave the order. Activate the catapults right away. The Count took out his sword and approached the edge of the wall and looked down as he continued to speak. There was anger, sorrow, and uncertainty mixed in his voice. Don't let even a single one live. Mueller heard something else at the same time. Bang! The first thing he saw was a silver light. It was not Cal's shield. This silver light that looked like the Milky Way continued to appear above Rain City. It was a shield. This shield that seemed to be imitating Cal's silver shield was continuing to appear in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4. More silver shields continued to appear as they covered the sky over and over again. Although he was mixed blood, the fact that he was a dwarf allowed Mueller to know the source of that shield right away. A dragon. He knew only a dragon could do this. He thought about the young dragon that lived in this territory. The young dragon had created these shields. There was also someone Mueller was very familiar with standing by the shields. Choi Han. Choi Han was currently fighting against the helmeted knight. His black aura was viciously shaking as he fought. Although it was still dark with just a small speck of light, this aura was raging more angrily than ever before. Ha, ha, ha. And then there was the sword that was easily blocking against that aura. The helmeted knight was laughing as he used the sword-shaped ancient power to block Choi Han's attacks. He did not look to be struggling even though the sword had been destroyed once already. Bang! Their weapons clashed against each other. Choi Han took a step back and stumbled. Tap. There were things helping to support Choi Han in the air. It was the flying skeleton brigade that had been running away. They had come back. No, Mary had brought them back in order to create a path for Choi Han to walk in the air. Choi Han and the numerous white skeletons were fighting against the wyvern-riding helmeted knight. It was hard to see the two of them because of the number of flying skeletons. However, there was someone who had a good view of all of this. Mary. She had dead mana covering her body as her hands continued to shake. Her problem was that she could see things too clearly. Cal. The Countess arrived to support Cal, who was just barely standing up. She held back another scream. Cal had plopped down as soon as she supported him. Black blood was seeping out of Cal's eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Cal was coughing up so much blood that it looked as if he would have trouble breathing. The Countess could feel Cal's body starting to turn cold. Her son's body was starting to turn cold. She could see a doctor and a priest heading toward them from the distance. Cal, just a bit. Hold on just a bit longer. She started to massage Cal's body and arms. There was so much blood coming out of him that she was worried that he would have no blood left. She heard Cal's quiet voice at that moment. I'm okay. What? Her pupils started to shake as she looked at Cal. The priest and the doctor that approached him flinched. There was a voice crying in Cal's mind right now. Human, you are bleeding too much. Human, this is different than normal. Human, please stop bleeding. I will not let him survive. I will kill him even if I have to die as well. Stay here. Cal's hand moved to grab the air. The Countess started to frown after seeing trying to grab the air. She thought that Cal was hallucinating. His mind must be damaged as well. She finally calmed down after seeing the Count looking as if he was going to go crazy while looking at Cal. At least one of them had to think straight. However, it was hard for her to control her emotions after hearing what Cal said next. You'll get hurt if you go. The words he barely managed to say made it difficult for her to hold back her tears. The things that he was saying while coughing up blood, the things that he was saying even though his mind must be a mess, even during this moment. It made her feel as if her heart was breaking. Cal finally managed to speak again. "Stay by my side, cough." Cal coughed up blood again. He then started to bleed out once more. Cal did not manage to say the remaining words out loud. "Kill him. Stay by my side and kill him." Only one being understood his words. The bottom of Cal's pants was getting wet by something other than blood, even though it was not raining. The existence that was wetting Cal's pants with his tears had understood Cal's words. "I will kill him." Rumble. The cloudy sky started to roar again. The sword that was like a natural disaster. Although Rayon could not recreate that sword, Dragon could do something similar. It was not hard to imitate it. That was why he was a dragon, a storm. Hail. The dragon started to use his powers to sweep everything away. The sky was starting to turn black. At the same time, Rayon, the young dragon, recalled something he had heard from the ancient dragon. He finally seemed to figure out why Cal was acting like this. The ancient dragon, Iruhaben, had casually said something while teaching Rayon. "Little kid, have you heard about the dragon slayers? They're called dragon catchers sometimes too." Rayon had not liked that word at all. How dare they capture the great and mighty dragons? Well, you will probably never have to deal with a dragon slayer trying to kill you. In fact, the dragon slayer would probably do all sorts of things to keep you alive. The ancient dragon Iruhaben had thought that Cal had been a descendant of the dragon slayer household. He had not said that while imagining a day like today. It was just common knowledge that he was sharing with Rayon. Dragon slayers are unique individuals. They have overcome the limits of human beings. They are similar to nature, humans who were similar to nature. Those words had made Rayon respond back to Iruhaben. "Our weak human is similar to nature as well. That is why I'm saying that your weak human punk is a dragon." "Well, I guess I should pretend not to know since he is trying to hide it. What are you saying? Nothing. Anyways, listen to me, little kid. If a dragon slayer comes after you, run." Rayon had snorted at that warning, however. Iruhaben continued to speak in a serious tone. "Those bastards are humans who grow by eating dragons. Each dragon had different colors and attributes. Dragons were said to be the closest existences to nature. They needed to eat dragons in order to become more like nature. Young dragons like you have to be especially careful. Your body has not grown up and you can't use dragon's breath. Well, you have the unlucky punk by your side, so you'll probably be fine growing up slowly. There is no way the great and mighty me will get hurt." Iruhaben chuckled as he responded back. "Little kid, there are no great and mighty existences in the world." Rayon, the black dragon, finally realized that today, I am not great and mighty. I am still far from it. Rayon looked at the hand that was holding onto his invisible paw. There was blood dripping from that hand. Rayon put his emotions into his magic. Drip, drip. It started to rain. The remaining wyverns continued to rush toward the silver shield. The bears dodged the catapults and arrows as they charged toward the cracked castle walls. The tigers tried to hit the bears from the back, however. There were at least 10 bears for each tiger. It was at that moment. Rumble, the rain started to change. The rain turned into a storm and then into a hailstorm as it started to roar. Then a thunderbolt struck down from the sky. Ki-e-e-e-I, tens. No, hundreds of thunderbolts fell toward the wyvern knights and the bears. The thunderbolts aimed at the enemies without even a tiny bit of error. These thunderbolts were like that sword from earlier, sharply trying to slash everything in their way. However, there was a person who was able to easily slash away that storm and hail. This place is really fun. Is it a mage that is trying to copy me? Who is it? The helmeted knight. He licked his lips as he cut through the hail and thunderbolts and looked around. The ancient powers that Rayon had felt earlier, the power that reminded him of natural disasters, the knight's sword that consisted of storms, hail, and volcanic eruptions easily handled the fake imitations. The helmeted knight's gaze turned toward Choi Han. He chuckled while watching Choi Han spit out some blood. The black aura was rumbling in accordance with its owner's emotions. The helmeted knight made eye contact with Choi Han. Maybe you'd have a chance if you had achieved pure darkness, but you are still far from it. The knight lightly swung his sword. The back of his hand was slightly bleeding. The black aura had caused this injury. However, the helmeted knight showed no fear. The dwarves' armor was protecting his body. It was the creation of the dwarves that wanted to kill dragons. It was good enough to be a dragon catcher's armor. I still can't lower my guard around him. Clang! The two swords clashed again. The black aura that suddenly appeared in front of him made a small cut on his left cheek. At the same time, his volcanic ancient power slammed down onto the black aura. Bang! The noise was loud enough to drown out the thunderbolts. I told you, you can't win. The knight laughed and Choi Han clenched his teeth. Even Choi Han knew what the knight was trying to say. If I managed to complete it, the black aura, it would have been a better battle if he had completed the darkness. Just what the hell is that sword? His aura could not win against the sword. It seemed to be at a completely different level. Choi Han stood on top of one of the few skeletons remaining as he tried to catch his breath. He was having trouble breathing. He is strong. He is stronger than me, just one step. I could have defeated him if I took just one more step forward. Huff, huff. How long had it been since he had trouble breathing like this? He had not experienced this for over 10 years. Choi Han could not wipe away the blood that came out every time he took a breath. After coughing up blood for the first time in a long time, it felt odd to him. He realized something at that moment. Cal had always coughed up even more blood each time. Choi Han started to frown. This person is strong. However, Choi Han did not have the thought of losing in his mind. Choi Han started to frown even more as the helmeted knight mockingly continued to speak. I came because they said that there was someone with ancient powers, but I didn't think he would cough up blood like they said he would. His body is weak. He doesn't have the plate to support it, but he still gathered ancient powers. One of the knight's comments were making Choi Han angry. Nature allowed that punk to gain access to ancient powers. The knight was speaking as if Cal had taken things that he should not have been allowed to take. That was why Choi Han's mind was in a mess right now. Honestly speaking, Cal Henitus was the one that the helmeted knight found to be the most interesting. Only people who had nature's permission, the people with the plate to support them, could earn ancient powers. Although the people of the world thought that you needed heaven's mandate to be lucky enough to find ancient powers, it was actually calculated by nature about who would get access to them. That was why the knight could not believe that someone like Cal could have 2 ancient powers. Why someone with such a small plate, the power of wood and regeneration? Those were the powers that the helmeted knight realized as he clashed against Cal's shield. Choi Han was the person he found to be the second most interesting. This was someone whose plate was almost as large as his own. He found it weird that nature did not bestow any ancient power onto Choi Han. Choi Han charged toward the knight who seemed to be thinking about something else. The two of their swords clashed once again. Bang! The vibrations from the clash destroyed the surrounding skeletons and shook the air. The half-transparent sword and black aura were pushing against each other as the two men stared at one another. Choi Han could see the brown eyes behind the helmet. The helmeted knight started to smile. Danger. Choi Han tried to step back. It had been a while since he had felt such a feeling. It was something that reminded him of Iruhaben, the ancient dragon. The helmeted knight's eyes looked deep into Choi Han's eyes. The knight then whispered to Choi Han, "You've also lived a long time." Those words made Choi Han flinch. "You too." That slight hesitation made the knight start to smile. His arms started to move. Ugh! He had caught Choi Han by the neck. However, that was just the beginning. Mary's monsters quickly bit into the wyvern that the helmeted knight was riding on in order to help Choi Han out. However, the knight stabbed his sword into Choi Han's shoulder. It dug into the wound like hail, rushed at it like a storm, and burned at it like a volcano. The helmeted knight started to smile while continuing to choke Choi Han. Choi Han looked pitiful as the knight continued to choke him. This was fun. It was worth coming out for the first time in a long time. I'm sure I'll see you again. The knight chuckled while looking at Choi Han's frowning face. His face was full of anger and pain. The knight slowly let go while continuing to look at Choi Han. However, he saw the emotion disappearing from Choi Han's face at that moment. Grab. The hand at the bottom of the stabbed shoulder grabbed the helmeted knight's hand. Choi Han's other hand then grabbed onto the sword stabbed in his shoulder. It all happened in a moment. Sizzle Choi Han's palm started to burn, as if he was touching lava. Choi Han observed the helmeted knight with an emotionless expression for a split second. This was Choi Han's real face. Choi Han, who had flinched on purpose, showed his true expression. His true expression was one of no expression. His face had stiffened up after living for so long, such that it showed no emotion. Kick. Choi Han's foot kicked at the wyvern's neck. He then jumped down with the helmeted knight and the sword in each of his hands. The skeletons hesitated before quickly moving away. The wyvern that no longer had the knight was immediately hit with a thunderbolt. Screech. Boom! The final wyvern fell to the ground. The dragon had killed the last wyvern. He then headed outside of the silver shield that he had created. The dragon was the only one left in the air. Choi Han was currently falling down together with the helmeted knight. "Are you crazy?" The helmeted knight kicked Choi Han and tried to move away. He then brought out even more of his ancient powers. However, Choi Han's hand that was covered in black aura had no intentions of letting the ancient power sword go. The helmeted knight was not worried about the fall. That wasn't the issue. However, there was something that he was worried about: dead mana. The antithesis of nature was gathering together in order to create a large orb. There was a small monster skeleton at the center. The helmeted knight started to frown at the power that was weaker than him, but still continuing to gather together. He felt it behind his back. He felt a small arrow aiming for his back. The necromancer was gathering her strength. The dead mana surrounding the small monster was turning sharp like a sword. There was also a power that was supporting the dead mana. It was the fake magic that was imitating his hail, storm, and volcano ancient powers. The young dragon remained invisible as he sent his powers to support the dead mana. The dead mana that had gathered together like a small sword had turned into an arrowhead, while Rayon's powers turned it into a large arrow. The helmeted knight could see the veins on Choi Han's hands that were holding onto him. He saw the will to never let go in Choi Han's eyes. "I'll really get hurt like this," the knight started to shout as he frowned. "Are you crazy? I will not die if I get hit by that. Only you will die." The arrow was accurately aiming for the helmeted knight's back. It was slowly forming into a full arrow. That arrow looked as if it could easily pierce both the helmeted knight and Choi Han. Choi Han, who was looking at the arrow, looked back toward the helmeted knight. "I've been crazy for a long time." He had already been crazy. It happened a long, long time ago. He had gone crazy inside the forest of darkness. How could you not go crazy after living for tens of years on your own? Choi Han did not like how relaxed this knight was. He needed to see this knight getting hurt in order to suppress some of his anger. A smile slowly formed on his emotionless face. It was because he was thankful that Mary had understood his intentions. People definitely were stronger together. Rayon started to speak in Choi Han's mind at that moment. "You will definitely not die. Stupid Choi Han." The arrow then flew forward. "Son of a..." Another loud noise could be heard outside the Hennetu's territory, along with the helmeted knight's shout. Bang! Cal snorted once more after seeing a blinding explosion occur once more. "You unbelievable fools." The vitality of the heart. The ancient power was working to get rid of all the blood on his body. Cal slowly started to stand up. He had not fallen just yet. Translator's note: plate is being used to describe the body. For example, the bigger the plate, the more food you can put on it. So to have a small plate or a weak plate means that the person cannot become very strong. Chapter 200. There's a dragon. 5. Grab onto the castle wall. The soldiers immediately grabbed onto the wall or flattened themselves against the floor after hearing the count's shout. The explosion shook the entire territory. Although the explosion took place in the sky, the aftershock was directly felt by the castle wall. Count Hennetus subconsciously made a comment. This is not a battle for humans. This war was not just for humans. It had already gone beyond that level. He then turned his head toward his son and his wife. He couldn't help but let out a gasp. Ha! This gasp almost sounded like a laugh. His son, who had gotten back up at some point, had created a small shield in order to protect the countess, the doctor, and the priest. Count Hennetus realized something at this moment. This is a war that is beyond the level of humans, and my son is at the center of this battle. Seeing his son standing up and looking better made the Count's mind become complicated. He pushed off the wall in order to slowly get back up. On the other hand, Cal had no idea what Count Hennetus was thinking as he looked toward the burning darkness that flashed for a moment within the explosion. What the hell is that? Cal, like most people with no martial arts training, did not have enhanced vision, so he could not see anything properly. What he saw was Choi Han's power. It was his extremely slightly imperfect darkness. It was absorbing the dead mana in order to explode. Light and darkness had combined in order to cause that explosion. And then, remaining at the site of that explosion, drip, drip, rain continued to fall. The rain fell, not on the ground, but onto the bodies of the dead wyverns and bears as it mixed with the blood. Drip. The dust that was in the air after the explosion was erased by the wind and the rain. Things finally became visible. Crack, crack. The helmeted knight's armor started to crack as pieces started to fall to the ground. This was a set of armor made by a dwarf that was trying to catch a dragon. That armor cracked before falling into the mud below. You bastards! The helmeted knight clenched his teeth and started to swear. Ugh! He coughed up some blood as he stood back up. His red bloodshot eyes looked forward, the white tiger. The white tiger Gashan had used his incantations in order to protect someone. He had protected Choi Han. Choi Han was looking at the dragon slayer while holding on to the shoulder that was pierced by the ancient power sword. However, the dragon slayer was not looking back at him. Ha ha ha. Choi Han could see that the helmeted knight was not injured even though he was coughing up blood. That knight's armor was amazing. However, Rayon had destroyed that armor. The knight's gaze turned extremely chilling. There were all sorts of natural disasters roaring inside of his body. They were starting to surround him, as if he had turned into the dragon slayer sword. The knight started to laugh as he started to speak. There is a dragon here. There was a dragon here. Only a dragon could destroy a flame dwarf tribe's item. He had thought that it was just a talented mage who was imitating him. But now, he knew that a dragon must be raising its arrogant head and looking at him from somewhere. It probably decided to lend its powers once in order to kill him. The dwarf had said the following before giving him the armor. This cannot defend against a dragon's breath, but it should be able to guard against an average adult dragon's magic. Even a dragon lord? Why are you talking about something that does not exist? The dragon lord is the emperor of magic. It cannot defend against it. If there was a real dragon lord, would we be doing this? This armor should manage to defend against an ancient dragon's magic at least once as well. That is our limit. The dragon slayer's instincts were telling him something, an ancient dragon or one that was beyond that level. A dragon with at least that level of magic was here. But isn't there only one ancient dragon? He only knew about the ancient dragon that was close to death. There is another ancient dragon? He. He started to laugh. Those trash dragon bastards. The ancient dragon probably watched these existences of nature fighting as it stood there with a haughty expression. Otherwise, there was no reason for it to step in right now. If it had stepped in from the beginning, it would have used dragon fear and dragon breath in order to kill him. It would have been easy since he was not complete yet. Ugh! The knight coughed up blood once again. He had pulled the ancient power sword out of Choi Han in order to guard himself the moment the armor started to break, however. His internal organs were still shocked by Choi Han's aura and the dead mana explosion. It felt as if all of his organs were twisting inside of his body. He had not felt this for a long time. Only if I had the crown? That was the reason I had bowed my head to that crazy bastard in the first place. The knight thought about the reason he was not complete yet and started to grind his teeth. He felt a sense of disappointment. He could not be complete because some damn bastards had stolen the crown. His body was close to its limit, as the sword of disasters had been destroyed a couple of times as well. He could only use it once more in this battle. His body, his plate, would not be able to support anything more. Although he had one more power of the dragon catcher, that was a pitiful power that he did not need, the dominating aura. That laughable power that only a scammer would use did not meet the dignity of a dragon slayer. The aura was an illusion without any real strength. The helmeted knight made up his mind to definitely capture the bastards who had stolen the crown as he looked around. Vicious bastards. Another arrow that was imitating his power was flying through the air. There was also the black aura, and finally, plop, plop. There were the dead wyvern and bear corpses that were standing back up in the mud. Behind them were the tiger tribe with the white tiger at the center, as well as the humans aiming their arrows and catapults at him. The knight closed his eyes. Looks like we lost. Anybody could see that they had lost. Choi Han clenched his right hand even after seeing the knight smiling in pity. His left shoulder still had the wound from the sword of disasters. His left arm would have become useless if the knight had not pulled back the power in order to defend himself. That was why Choi Han remained alert. It was at that moment. Plop. The final piece of the armor fell to the ground. The helmet finally fell. The knight started to move just as his face was revealed to the world. The powers that had been surrounding his body changed into the shape of a sharp blade. That blade was directed in a single location. Block it! The tigers started to rush toward the knight at Gashin's command. Choi Han was already charging forward as well. Ki-e-e-e-I. The dead wyverns slowly started to move in order to block the knight's attack and hold him back. Even the dead bears stepped through the mud as they charged against the knight. They were chasing after the knight as if they had never been allies. The dead wyverns and dead bears frantically chased after the knight. However, these dead creatures disappeared the moment they touched the ancient power surrounding the helmeted knight. 1-0 could stop the knight. He continued to run without stopping. He was heading for the castle wall. To be more specific, he was heading toward Cal. He then started to laugh. Pee-wah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha. I knew it would be like this. The arrow in the air did not move. The arrow that was imitating his natural disasters did not fly toward the castle wall. Cal and the helmeted knight made eye contact. The knight started to shout. You seem to be receiving a dragon's protection. He already did not like how Cal was using ancient powers, but now this human was even receiving a dragon's protection. He deserved to die. A deep hatred filled the helmeted knight's eyes. A power that was stronger than ever before surrounded his body. I will destroy you and this castle. The arrow that had been shining in the air suddenly disappeared. Instead, Cal felt a small body grabbing his body. Grab. The invisible rayon stuck to Cal as if he was a shield. He opened his wings and hugged Cal, as if he was saying that he would receive the power of the disasters. I will not let go. Cal felt Rayon's body heat as he looked around. He then raised his hand to pat Rayon's back. Choi Han, who had been rushing toward them, suddenly flinched. Something is weird. The fact that Cal Nim is this calm should mean that it is not very dangerous. It was at that moment. It was the moment that the helmeted knight jumped up in the air. It was the moment that the sword of disasters looked as if it would pierce through the castle wall. The helmeted knight, Rayon, and everybody else running toward him could hear the laughter. Cal was laughing. A calm voice started to come out of his mouth. I knew that those damn bears were shrewd. The knight's eyes slightly shook. Cal had heard Mary's voice just a moment ago. Mary, who had been quietly standing there in her invisible state, had urgently spoken for the first time. The bears I am not controlling are moving. Cal started to laugh. He looked at the bear corpses that were running toward them as if they were trying to stop the knight. There were some alive bears in the mix. A bear pretended to be dead. Cal then moved his gaze toward the knight who was pretending to rush at him. That bastard is shrewd too. He was pretending to charge at Cal as if he had given everything up. Yes, he was just pretending. Oh, you knew about it? The knight started to smile. The hatred disappeared from his eyes as if it had all been an act as he took a magic scroll out of his pocket. The bears also jumped up into the air and took out magic scrolls. These were most likely teleportation scrolls. The white tiger Gashin started to shout. Catch them! Catch the bears! The count shouted as well. Fire! The catapults and archers started to shoot toward the bears. I may have lost, but I'm not ready to die just yet. His snake-like face started to smile. His face that was revealed after the helmet was destroyed looked like a snake. It looked like an emugi that had yet to become a dragon. Cal continued to laugh as he looked toward the one person who had understood his actions. Choi Han. He was the only one who realized something was weird while everybody else rushed toward Cal. He was stepping onto the dead wyverns as he was rushing up into the air. It was almost in line with the knight's movements. He would be at the helmeted knight's level if he stepped on just one more dead wyvern. Cal could feel Rayon moving away from his body. Rayon's front paw started to create magic once again. Choi Han jumped off the wyvern's head and flew toward the knight. The helmeted knight was still looking at Cal. He did not waste these few seconds of time. "You bastard who has received a dragon's protection." The teleportation scroll was ripped, and the knight's body started to disappear. True anger could be seen through his smile. A human who had received a dragon's protection. This was someone who deserved to die. The knight swung his sword of disasters toward Choi Han, who was flying toward him, as he continued to speak to Cal. His body had almost disappeared. "I will soon return to kill you, Ugh." However, something got him before he could disappear. The knight let out a moan and slowly lowered his head. He could see what had hit him. My sword? No, it was not his sword. However, it was something that was similar to the sword of disasters. He could feel storms, hail, and volcanoes in this sword. It was fake, but it was very similar to his own. The knight heard a young voice in his ear. "You will die first." He could not see anything. Suddenly, two eyes appeared from out of nowhere. They were dark blue eyes. They had the distinct shape of dragon's eyes and shone brightly. Only these eyes appeared to greet the knight. Crackle, there was a spark, and the knight's body started to teleport. However, the sword that stabbed him was continuing to spin inside of his body. The dark blue eyes were opened wide and did not let the enemy go. "Ugh, cough." The knight coughed up blood once again. Choi Han did not miss that moment. He used the moment that the sword of disasters weakened in order to cut the knight's arm off with his black aura. Slash. The removed arm became visible again and moved away from the influence of the magic. However, the knight did not have any time to focus on this. The sword of disasters. It returned and surrounded the knight's body. It was able to destroy the fake sword made from magic. However, Rayon's magic had reached his heart. The imitation magic sword turned into the shape of a dragon's paw and clenched onto his heart. Crackle. The knight clenched the top of his heart. However, the power that was most similar to dragons, the power that could only be handled by a dragon's breath or dragon's body, the ancient power of disasters destroyed Rayon's magic sword at that moment. Clang, the magic broke, and a snake-like power came from the knight's stomach, around the spot where his dantian would be. It was his other ancient power. That finally started to move. Cal suddenly got the chills. "Ah," he heard Mary's shocked gasp at that moment. At the same time, Cal could see the helmeted knight silently whistling. Perhaps. He heard Mary starting to shout. I can't control them." Cal could read the helmeted knight's lips. "I told you I can't die yet." Choi Han lowered his head to see what was grabbing onto his ankles. It was a wyvern corpse. The wyverns were slaves to the dragon's slayer even after death. It could not get away at all. The wyvern corpse started to shake and seemed to resemble boiling water. Cal immediately started to speak. "Dodge it. It's going to explode." It looked as if it was about to explode. The wyverns had chased the helmeted knight to the castle wall. The castle wall and the tigers would be in danger if they exploded. He could not spread his shield all the way to the catapult and the archers. They would be unable to attack the bears if he did so. There were many soldiers currently standing there on the castle wall as well. Cal started to frown. This was the reason he hated wars. "Ha ha ha." The helmeted knight could not hold back his laughter. He found Cal's frown to be entertaining. Crackle, his body started to disappear. He was aiming for this moment when Choi Han was being held back. Mary could not control the wyverns, and Cal had no energy left to use his ancient powers. The dragon also simply continued to use magic. The helmeted knight was aiming for all of this. Bang. One of the wyvern corpses exploded. That was the beginning. The people closest to the helmeted knight who were trying to escape with him were caught up in the explosion. Ah, why are you doing this to us? The dead wyvern's explosion did not differentiate between allies and enemies. The bears were getting killed by the explosions. Ah, why is this happening? No. Ah! The tigers retreated while looking at the bears in shock. He's killing his own allies. The knight was killing the wyverns and bears in order to create an opening for him to escape. Tens of wyverns started to explode at the same time. Cal urgently activated his shield to cover the soldiers. The helmeted knight laughed while watching all of this. He didn't know why nature allowed someone with such a weak plate to have ancient powers. However, ancient powers usually picked people like him as masters. That was why most average humans could only handle one ancient power. Weak bastard. There had to be a reason a shield ancient power had picked this punk as its master. Everything in the world had a reason behind it. The knight scoffed at the idiot who was overusing his power in order to save the soldiers rather than to catch him. He raised his head one last time. Screech. A shadow covered the ground near the castle wall. Everyone had forgotten about this thing. The 15-meter-long white wyvern. Even it could not go against its master's orders as it dragged its injured body all the way to the wall. The master then gave the order to the wyvern. Die. Screech the wyvern screeched. However, the animal that had lost its freedom had no choice but to obey. The 15 meters long monster rushed toward the wall, to be more specific, toward Choi Han. Boom, this wyvern was almost the size of a dragon. That large being charged at Choi Han, who had the highest chance of getting in its master's way. Cal finally started to speak. Choi Han's shoulder was already injured. Rayon had no more methods to fight against the dragon slayer. However, if it was against a dragon slayer that was trying to run away, Rayon helped Choi Han. Cal heard Gashin shouting next to him. Duck! Cal closed his eyes. A gust of wind brushed past him. It was the aftershock of the explosion. Cal opened his eyes once the wind died down. He could see the mess outside of the castle wall. The trees, boulders, and everything else were destroyed. All he could see in the muddy area were the corpses of the dead bears and dead wyverns. The dragon slayer was not there. The ground started to move and the tigers started to get back up. A transparent orb surrounding Choi Han slowly approached the castle wall. Cal lifted his head up. The clouds had disappeared, leaving behind a clear sky. A ray of light started to shine down on them. Cal Nim? Cal looked toward Choi Han and started to speak. Did you leave a mark? It was the invisible dragon and not Choi Han who responded to him. I did. Cal started to walk. He was staggering after overusing his ancient power. However, there was still something he had to do. Cal walked over until he was standing next to Count Daruth Henetus. Father. Cal helped Count Daruth Henetus stand back up. That action made the soldiers stand up as well. They all looked up at the sky. The sky was clear without a single cloud. The silver shield that had been protecting the soldiers was still there. I survived. That was the thought that was going through all of the soldiers' minds. Click, click. The citizens started to open their doors. They did not see the enemies anymore. They did it. The citizens realized that they had won. Father. The Count knew that this was just the beginning. He could see the fatigue on Cal's face. Beep, his second son, Basin, was running toward them. There was a video communication device in his arms. Basin started to shout. Enemy ships have been discovered at the first boundary of the northeastern ocean. The Count's expression stiffened up. The Indomitable Alliance was cutting through the still frozen shores in order to head southward. They were aiming for the Rhone Kingdom in a two-pronged attack by sea and air. They probably had a much larger force coming via ships than via wyverns. The Count subconsciously turned to look at Cal. He then flinched. The Count could see that his son was smiling. Cal was hearing Rayon's voice in his head. The trace of my magic headed to the northeastern ocean. Rayon had left his mark on the dragon slayer's heart. Cal looked toward Choi Han and started to speak. Time to go hunting. There were no citizens nor soldiers to protect over at the ocean. Who cares if he was a dragon catcher? It wouldn't matter if they beat him to death. Cal calmly looked back toward Count Henetus and made an observation. The shield did not break. The concerned expression on the Count's face slowly changed. The hand that was holding his son's hand was shaking. He just held his son's hand tighter instead of responding back. Although Cal had not meant for it to happen, his words had still been conveyed to the entire kingdom through the video communication device in Basin's arms. Translator's note. 1. Is he still a helmeted knight if he lost his helmet, too? The Imugi is a creature from Korean legends. It is said that it can become a dragon after living for 1,000 years, and grabbing a Sintamani, a wish-fulfilling jewel in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions.